Let the doors be opened.
This is the current one. J'invite la Chambre à prendre note de l'utilisation.
I invite the House to take note that today we are using the wooden mace. This mace is a reminder of the fire that claimed 7 lives and destroyed the original Parliament buildings the night of February 3rd, 1916.
In that fire was the old mace. The wooden copy that you see today was subsequently made and used temporarily until the current one was given to us by the United Kingdom in 1917. Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement commune, étude à la deuxième lecture du projet de loi.
Second reading stage of Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act.
Monsieur Champagne, appuyé par Monsieur.
Mr. Champagne, seconded by Mr. Fraser, moves that the Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee of Industry, Science and Technology. Debate.
The Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un plaisir.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to appear before you. For the first time, the NASDAQ bell rang in Ottawa. First time in the history of NASDAQ at Pentex. So I think that this is a great moment for Canada, and it's a great moment for Canadian industry. Obviously, I'm here, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am pleased to be able to speak to Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act, also known as the ICA, and propose that it be read for a second time and referred to committee. Before going into the details of legislative changes, I want to offer a few observations on the legislation. As you know, the ICA is an important asset for our economy. It contributes to making Canada a destination of choice for foreign investment by ensuring a stable and predictable system.
To businesses and investors through a clear and predictable regulatory regime is ever more important as we continue to attract significant new investments. And I think colleagues on both sides would have seen Canada as what the economy of the 21st century needs. No matter which country I visit, it is understood that Canada is a great investment destination, particularly when it comes to clean technologies, critical minerals, and automotive and battery supply chains. In fact, Madam Speaker, Bloomberg ranked Canada second in the world for the battery ecosystem, ahead of the United States and just behind China. But this is a great thing that we have achieved in a couple of months, I would say, and we should all be proud as Canadians. I will continue to work tirelessly to attract more investments to Canada that will create well-paying jobs and spur economic growth, and I look forward to more big announcements in 2023. Je le répète, cette loi vise...
I say again, this legislation will encourage economic growth and job growth. It does not provide for any intervention unless an investment would undermine Canada's national security. However, it gives us the authority required to act quickly and decisively at need. Over the last years, we've noted 3 broad themes when revising this legislation: respond to strategic and geopolitical concerns, improve certainty and transparency for investors, and protect the economy and innovation in Canada.
The law in the current geopolitical context. Canada's interaction with the rest of the world are changing. Hostile state and non-state actors pursue deliberate strategies to acquire goods, technologies, and intellectual property. They do so in ways that are incompatible with Canada's interests and principles. We also know that foreign investments can be used as a conduit for foreign influence activities which seek to weaken our norms and institutions. The nexus between technology and national security is now clear. and I think we had recent example of that, and here to stay, I would say, for the long run. Rapid technological innovation has provided Canada with new opportunities for economic growth, but it has also given rise to new and difficult policy challenges. So let me talk about modernizing the law and supporting investment in Canada. At the same time, we need to support a welcoming investment climate for beneficial investment. This means that the ICA operation must be clear, transparent, and I'm sure we would all agree, efficient. We know that regulatory certainty and the speed of reviews are important factors in attracting investment in Canada. It's all about predictability and having a very stable regime. Let me talk about trends in innovation that we're seeing now. Canada's foreign investment regime also needs to adapt to the speed of innovation. Intangible assets, such as intellectual property and data, have grown in importance in defining Canada's economic strength, and at the same time pose new challenges in terms of how these are to be managed. A good example of this challenge is quantum technology. Our government recognized the value of the intangible economy, its growth, and the relevant opportunities for Canadians across our nation. That's why in January, very recently, announced the launch of Canada's National Quantum Strategy, which will shape the future of quantum technologies in Canada and help create thousands of jobs across our nation. Quantum science and technologies are at the leading edge of research and innovation, with enormous potential for commercialization and game-changing advances, including more effective drug design, better climate change forecasting, improved navigation, and innovations in clean technologies. The Government of Canada is committed to supporting the continued growth of this emerging sector as it helps drive Canada's economy and support highly skilled jobs, and I would say well-paying jobs as well. And to ensure we protect it, quantum science is already listed as a sensitive technology area under the ICA's National Security Guidelines. Les modifications que nous proposons aujourd'hui, Madame la Présidente.
The changes we're proposing today are based on these themes. Our government has already undertaken efforts to modernize the ICA by updating our policies to improve transparency and offer certainty to investors. Among the most recent year's developments, in 2021, we updated guidelines on national security review of foreign investments. In 2022, in the face of the unprovoked and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, we developed a new policy to review foreign investment coming from Russia. We also introduced a mechanism for voluntary filing for investors who want to obtain regulatory certainty, which leads to the same legal timelines as a mandatory filing. Investors, therefore, gain certainty regarding their plans, and the government has greater visibility and will have up to 5 years to review and take measures regarding an investment if there is no voluntary filing. Finally, a policy about foreign investments by state-owned entities in the sector of critical minerals as part of the ICA was announced in the fall.
Environment that I just mentioned, and I think all colleagues would recognize in this House. Le Canada reste une économie ouverte qui fait l'envie du monde.
Canada remains an open economy that is the envy of the world. But our country is also more and more the target of hostile actors. This is a threat for both our national security and our prosperity, now and in the future. That's why our government is taking bold steps to protect the Canadian market. We want to update our tools to better defend ourselves against current threats. I think it's fair to say that we're going through an unprecedented period where foreign investments are being examined more closely on a national security level, not only here, but around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic, consequences of climate change on security, supply chain disruptions around the world, changing geopolitical considerations are some of the considerations. It's only by equipping ourselves for tomorrow's threats that Canada will remain a destination of choice for foreign investors. Last year, we hit an unprecedented new record of filings, which lines up with the global trend of Canada's economic activity. I'll repeat that the ICA plays a key role in Canada's economic security. It will serve Canada well, but the legislation does need to be updated. It includes a review of foreign investors, significant foreign investors rather, to determine if the advantage is present for Canada, if there's a net advantage. The ICA also authorizes a review of investments that could undermine Canada's national security. All investments, regardless of their value or the country of origin of the investor, including minority investments and investments intended to create new Canadian businesses, are subject to this review process. The changes proposed will not affect the main aspects of the net advantage review. They include improvements to the review process regarding national security by making it more effective and even more predictable.
Time is right to pursue modernization of the Investment in Canada Act. That's certainly my belief, and I would say when I talk to CEOs and investors around the world, they understand that we need to modernize an instrument that has served our country very well. Now more than ever, we need to make sure we are doing everything we can to foster an innovative and healthy economy. The global environment has evolved significantly in recent years, including in global competition, investment, and technology. Under my leadership, our evolving policies and guidance have been addressing these developments as they arise, and we have taken clear and, I would say, decisive action on transactions when necessary to protect Canada's national security, and I can commit to this House that I will continue to do so. But we cannot and are not resting on the success of our past actions. The guidance and decision issued over the past several years make clear that some transactions, particularly those by state-owned or state-influenced investors, may be motivated by non-commercial imperatives that could harm Canada's national security. Allow me to repeat, these investments currently face enhanced scrutiny under the ICA. We have never and we will never hesitate to take action to protect Canada's national security. That's our responsibility, and we take it very, very seriously. Canada's well-known excellence in emerging and sensitive technologies and critical minerals is an attractive target for hostile states. Through these amendments, we are making sure we have the right tools to protect those sectors along with our IP, personal data, and critical infrastructure. Colleagues, the volume and complexity of foreign investment reviews is increasing, and this significant change provides a strong rationale for supporting ICA modernization. And I hope every member of this House will be supporting that, because that is working for Canada. There is nothing partisan or political about that. This is about protecting our national security and making sure we remain a destination for foreign investment. Fundamentally, we believe that an effective regime must be robust, it must be transparent and flexible to adapt to a changing world, and now is the time to make these changes. This new bill represents the most significant update of the ICA since 2009. Imagine, Madam Speaker, imagine the world where we are today and what it looked like in 2009. I would put it to all members that we would all agree that we need an update. We are making important moves now to review and modernize key aspects of the Act while ensuring that the overarching framework to support needed foreign investment to grow our economy remains strong and open. Laissez-moi parler des modifications à la loi.
Let me tell you about the amendments in C34. There's 7 proposed changes. First, a new requirement for a preliminary filing will be set up for certain investments. This will allow Canada to have a better oversight of investments in certain designated activity sectors, specifically where the investor would have access to assets or important technical information not available to the public, such as leading-edge intellectual property or trade secrets. At the end of the investment, this government can therefore ensure that irreparable damage is prevented. Investors would have to table a notice of investment within the timelines specified in the regulation.
Madam Speaker, I want to stress that we are taking a targeted approach or other relevant facts would have a non-necessarily burdensome impact on needed and beneficial investment into Canada without providing improvements to national security analysis. Our targeted approach will support transparency and certainty for investors, something that we all want. Second, the bill makes the national security review process more efficient by providing me, as Minister of Industry, in consultation with my colleague, the Minister of Public Safety, the authority to extend the national security review of investments, whereas previously a Governor-in-Council order was required at that stage. This is about being efficient. This is about going at the speed of business. This is about agility in light of different type of transaction. Removing the additional step of getting an order by the Governor-in-Council will give more time to our interdepartmental experts in security and intelligence to complete their vital work, including the intelligence analysis assessing the national security risks of a transaction. Troisièmement,
Thirdly, the amendments relate to penalties for non-compliance within the provisions of the ICA that were set decades ago and no longer correspond to current transaction valuations or inflation. As an example, for the current provisions under the ICA, the maximum penalty of $10,000 per day, which was established in 1985, will be increased to $25,000 per day per violation without limit. In addition, a brand new penalty for investors who fail to make the advance notice filing I mentioned earlier will be a fine of $500,000 or the prescribed amount, whichever is greater. This update, Madam Speaker, will ensure that the penalties have a greater deterrent effect.
The bill introduces the authority for me, as Minister of Industry, after a consultation with my colleague, the Minister of Public Safety, to impose an interim conditions on an investment. This will reduce the risk of national security injury taking place during the course of the review itself, such as through the possible transfer of assets, intellectual property, or trade secrets before the review is complete. Cinquièmement.
Fifth, the Act provides greater flexibility in mitigating national security risks by allowing me, as Minister for Industry, again in collaboration with my colleague, the Minister for Public Safety, to impose binding commitments on investors. These undertakings will have to demonstrate that they adequately mitigate the national security risks that would arise otherwise from the investment in question. This is a measure, I'm sure my colleagues will agree, that is already the case in the States, for example. Previously, the imposition of undertakings to mitigate the national security risks of a transaction could only be imposed by an order from the Governor-in-Council. With binding undertakings such as this that can be discussed and agreed at the ministerial level, they can also be potentially amended or even terminated if necessary.
Allows Canada to share case-specific information with international counterparts to help protect common security interests. This type of cooperation is so important when considering an investor that may be active in several jurisdictions, seeking the same technology, for example, would have more discretion to share such information, and of course, it would be based on the evaluation of confidentiality and other concerns in doing so. Canada's investment review regime is world-leading, and we share information and collaborate closely with our allies, several of whom, including among the Five Eyes, have either updated or introduced new screening mechanisms responding to geopolitical threats.
Finally, Madam Speaker, the Act introduces new provisions for the protection of information in the context of judicial review of decisions. This amendment will allow the government to rely on sensitive information to defend its national security decisions whilst protecting that information from disclosure. These new provisions also allow claimants to participate more fully in the process. To conclude,
make it clear that where national security is concerned, we do not hesitate to take decisive action. Our assessment of risk helps keep pace with evolving economic and geopolitical circumstances. While the ICA provides broad authority to intercede and address national security risks that can arise in foreign investment, this amendment builds on that strong foundation and improves on the mechanics of the process around national security. Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today. I hope that members will take this bill as seriously as it should, because the world is watching. We want to remain an attractive destination for investment, and this law will achieve that. Merci, Madame.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his opening speech on this important bill. My question for the Minister is, I know that the government has put in these policies and made some of these amendments here, but these are only as good as the Minister's own scrutiny of transactions. And in 2019, this Minister's predecessor approved the sale of Tanko Mine in Manitoba to a Chinese mining business. And that mining business now controls the only producing lithium mine in Canada and the only mine that produces most of the world's cesium. So the minister didn't ask them to divest, but he asked 3 others. Why would he not implement a divestment of that particular investment if he cares so much about state-owned enterprise interference?
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to my honourable colleague. He is a colleague I appreciate a lot, and I think we can work together in making sure that this bill will better protect Canada. Madam Speaker, when we take decisions in matters of national security, I think it will be comforting to the members and the public, which is with us today, that these decisions are taken on the basis of advice from our intelligence agencies and experts. Obviously, my role as Minister of Industry and my colleague, the Minister of Public Safety, is to make sure that we would act on the basis of intelligence that we receive. And I would remind my colleague that he will know very well, because he knows me quite well, that I never hesitated to take action. I blocked 3 transactions recently where Chinese companies were trying to take equity interest in mining companies in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to commend the leadership of the Minister. Because this is the kind of request that we have been making for a long time. For example, at the Industry Committee, we made a report on that matter on the ICA. It's interesting that there is at least a will to try and protect our companies, but for me, the issue of national security also comes hand in hand with economic security, protecting our headquarters, especially in Quebec, that has a strong spirit of SME. Sometimes the ICA is a hindrance. The question of thresholds could have been broached in the bill, but the minister decided to ignore this. How can we make sure that we protect our business headquarters? Is there a way to change thresholds? We are on the cusp of a recession, perhaps. Sometimes companies can devalue very rapidly, as was the case in COVID for airline companies. Perhaps there should have been clearer indications from Canada in that respect. The Honourable Minister. First of all, I would like to thank my colleague. I have a lot of respect for him. He collaborates greatly with us when it comes to industry. Madam Speaker, C34 has to do with national security. On the Investment Canada Act, there's 2 aspects to the ICA. Our amendments are to the national security side. I'm a Quebecan myself. I'm very close to SMEs throughout the country. And yes, I do understand the point that my colleague has made. As government, we have to do everything, of course, in order to keep HQs in Canada. We also have to attract new ones. In the battery industry, we are creating a whole new industry in Canada, Madam Speaker, that did not exist. We are bringing significant investments to Canada. I said in my speech, or Bloomberg has mentioned, that Canada is the second best country in the world when it comes to battery ecosystems. We'll continue to defend Canadian businesses.
Member Windsor West.
Pleased to stay in here today and talk about this bill. New Democrats on this file go back to 2003 with regards to China Mid-Metals and state-sponsored takeovers of Canada's oil fields, where nobody really wanted to intervene at that time. And each year there's thousands and thousands of files that are never even reviewed going through the lens. And my question to the minister, and thank you for bringing this forward, is really quite to the point, though, with regards to the investments that we've had in the past not looked at, that are smaller SMEs, as noted beforehand, but also other industries. We've seen in the past that in this House we've had to fight to save Canada's potash industry, McDonald Detweiler, others, but with the smaller SMEs and some of the innovation that's taking place, how can we actually in Parliament just give this to a minister and to him or her, that minister, to decide if they're going to include the public safety minister? Where's the lens for the rest of Parliament in this legislation?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague also, because we work together end in end, and it's been for a number of years now that we work together. Madam Speaker, I would say we need agility. We live in the world, and my colleague is very knowledgeable. He knows that a number of companies are trying to use different schemes to try to go around the law so that they would not be subject to a national security review in a way. So what we want is additional power for the minister to make sure that we better protect our national security. I think the law is achieving what the member just says, having more agility, for example, to make sure that during the review we protect the intellectual property. Imagine today, Madam Speaker, there is not even in the law a possibility for the minister to prevent the exchange of information while we do the review. And when it comes to intangible assets, obviously, you could do irreparable harm. So I would hope that the member would support, because we need to be more agility. Thank you, Madam.
Questions and comments? The member of Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In his speech, the minister spoke about the importance of innovation. And while my question isn't directly in the bill, it's related, and I hope you will allow it, because one area we need innovation is in telecommunications, where prices are going up for people in my community and across the country because of reduced competition. He'll soon be making a decision about a proposed merger between Rogers and Shaw, and we both know this merger isn't innovative. Innovation would be giving consideration to what the province of Saskatchewan has already done, building a national, publicly owned telecommunications network. My question to the minister, will he give this idea consideration in lieu of allowing even less competition in the telecommunications industry?
L'honorable ministre.
I'd like to thank my colleague, which we work very well together. And I'm happy to talk about telecom this morning. It gives me the opportunity to say, and I think the member knows well, and Canadians watching at home know, that the principle that I've applied since I became Minister of Industry is to make sure that we reduce price for Canadians. And the way to do that in Canada is to have more competition and at the same time to have innovation. We want a national fourth player, because we have found in our market that's the best way to make sure that we bring down prices for Canadians. But going back to C34, I think that the member, and I would hope for his support, because what the bill is asking is really to get to the modern economy. And a colleague like him who understands so much innovation would understand that there's a lot about intangible assets. And I think this law would give better tools, not only for me, but future minister, which will have to make sure to protect Canada's and our national security.
Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just wanted to ask the minister, because it is a significant day today in regards to what's taken place with respect to the NASDAQ. And I know that, when you take a look in terms of all the economic indicators, Canada is doing relatively well. A lot of innovation that's coming to our country. But there was something very significant that occurred today, and I think I would like to hear the minister talk about that historical event earlier today.
Honorable Ministre.
Madam Speaker, I could not be more question. I think it's one of the best questions I've heard in a long time. Madam Speaker, I would say I'm very delighted, because, the credit goes to all the men and women and the employees of OpenText. It's thanks to their talent, expertise, and know-how that we could celebrate today a moment in Canada's history that for the first time in our nation history, the NASDAQ bell was ring out of Canada. We did that here in Ottawa, and I think we should all be proud because OpenText is becoming one of the largest software companies in the world. They just made a recent acquisition. We had hundreds of their employees. We had the vice chairman of the NASDAQ. We were live on Times Square, Madam Speaker. Not very often you see Canada live on Times Square to celebrate the talent, expertise of our people. And I think it's a law like C-34 that will just protect exactly the IP, the intelligible asset, the know-how we have in this country. And I think all members should be really proud. And if they have something to do today, just give a phone call to one employee of OpenText to thank them for their good work so that we could all celebrate as Canadians.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. Margaret's South Shore. South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start off. I know the minister told me he's going to Washington next week. I know there's a Chinese balloon, surveillance balloon, going over the U.S., and I understand that the government has withdrawn their amendments to C-21, their terrible firearm amendments. So I'm wondering if the minister's there, if he spots it, maybe he could do something about it with an appropriate firearm. So after 8 years of this government, they're finally getting around to making some administrative changes to the Investment Canada Act. And why is this important? Because foreign direct investment is increasing and causing us great problems in Canada. Now, I would start off by saying and informing the House that while we think these amendments are inadequate to deal with the things that are happening, we will be voting in favor in principle in second reading for this bill because these are amendments that do improve the bill, just not enough. But we will be seeking considerable amendments to improve this bill at committee stage. And the minister went through some of the things that the bill does, and I'd just start by commenting on a few of them. I think the pre-implementation filing change that requires in certain industries when a deal is done that the filing and notification go to Investment Canada is good. It shouldn't happen after closing. I would have hoped that the minister would have actually made all investment applications subject to pre-filing. I don't know what the point of looking at an investment, a foreign direct investment after it's closed is. It's very difficult to unwind a transaction. So the minister spoke about the streamlining of the process to speed it up within the 45 days. We have some concerns about removing cabinet from that process. Not necessarily up front, because that process to start it, I think, is an important one. But when the review comes back from officials and either for or against it having a national security or net benefit issue, we believe that in all cases that should go to cabinet. I know the experience during the previous government, the Harper government, was that when these things came back to cabinet, there was robust discussion on every one, and it resulted in a better decision. And so the power to actually decide that in the end of the day, we think should still rest with cabinet. It does add the ability for the minister to create a list of targeted industries through regulation. We'd like to learn a little more about what industries the minister is going to address, because there are industries, I think, outside of the list, such as to be parochial in my neck of the woods, seafood and other areas that are being targeted in the food sector by state-owned enterprises from less cooperative countries. The interim conditions and all of that are in the bill are a good addition to the bill. And the area of the legal process appeal issues around secrecy for national security or commercial reasons, that's an area we want to explore a little more in committee to just make sure we're understanding that we're not going to be blocking in the future information that the public should have. And I think there are some transparency provisions as well in this bill that say if the minister rejects an acquisition, that the reasons have to be fairly transparent and public, and there's, I don't believe, a requirement to do that now. But we don't believe they address some things. And let's start a bit with the record of this government with regard to China's takeover of many of our important assets. And the other thing the bill doesn't do, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, is deal with the sale of assets, not just the company, but the assets themselves of companies. So in 2017, there was a company called Norsat, still is, out of British Columbia, which also owns a company called Sinclair in Toronto. And it was acquired by Hytera in China, which is partially owned by the government of China, in the critical telecommunications business. And the Minister of the day of Industry refused, even though he was urged to many times in this House, to do a national security review of that acquisition. It gives the minister the freedom to say, I don't think it's a problem, I'm not going to do it. So now national security review was done of that acquisition. And that's a problem because here we are in 2022, Hytera was charged with 21 counts of espionage in the United States in January 2022 and was banned from doing business in the United States by President Biden. Yet 8 months later, the RCMP bought radio frequency equipment to go into their communication system, giving the Chinese state-owned subsidiaries access to all the locations of where all the RCMP communication services are. There was no public security review on that. And these are the things that still fall through the cracks. Manitoba-based lithium mining company, Tantalum Mining Corp., as I mentioned earlier, known as Tanco in Manitoba, was purchased in 2019. Again, the previous minister, not this one, refused to do a national security review of that acquisition. And when this minister banned asked three Chinese state-owned enterprises to divest of Canadian critical mining assets, he didn't even include this one, yet it's the largest producer of lithium and cesium in Canada, and all of it goes to China. In 2020, we all know that the Department of Foreign Affairs bought X-ray equipment from a Chinese state-owned enterprise to go in all the embassies. I believe this minister may have been the minister at that time, I'm not sure. No, he wasn't. But it was a Liberal minister, obviously, that said, hey, that's okay, and didn't back off on it until it was erased in this House. And we know, as the minister referenced, in March 2021, the minister updated and enhanced the guidelines for national security reviews in the absence of having an updated act, which could have been done. But in January, the minister didn't even follow his own guidelines when he did not include the Neolithium Corporation or the Tanco Corporation in a divestiture order. In December, I mentioned Hytera in December, and the Canadian Border Service Agency. And of course, this week we learned, while it's not an acquisition, that the scientific arm of the Army of the People's Republic of China is doing research on artificial intelligence and supercomputing in our universities, our 10 biggest universities. And they own the IP from that, and it's partially funded by Canadian taxpayers. So these are the things the bill doesn't address, and it's a shameful situation that we are actually helping the largest surveillance state in the world, who use that technology not only on their own citizens but to repress the Uyghurs, that we actually help develop that technology. And of course, we know they use that technology here. China passed in 2017 a National Security Act in Clause 7 and 10 of that act in China requires all citizens and all companies to spy on companies and people in the world. It's against the law for a company based in China to not spy and steal technology and information from companies abroad. Yet we allow these takeovers to be happening in the last 8 years of this government. Now, there are a number of areas that we need to talk about for additional improvements. So we believe there was a really good House of Commons Industry Committee report, of which our leader was the vice chair of in the last Parliament, of which most of those recommendations have been ignored by this government, even though the government members put the recommendations forward. So not only are they ignoring the recommendations that the official opposition put forward, they're ignoring the recommendations to the improvement to the Investment Canada Act put forward by their own members of Parliament. And recommendation number 1 dealt with state-owned enterprises in that report. And what it asked for was that state-owned enterprises for all countries that we deem to be authoritarian or hostile to Canada, that they be an automatic review. And the way you do that is by reducing the financial threshold for the automatic review. Right now, that's $415 million. So a state-owned enterprise can come in and buy anything they want in Canada for under $415 million, as my friend from the NDP referenced in his question to the minister. They can buy anything they want without any scrutiny by the government. And so the issue there, for example, even in my own community, in the last quarter, 4 fish buying businesses were bought by Chinese state-owned enterprises in the South Shore of Nova Scotia. And why that's important is because those businesses set the price of what they get from fishermen. They set what the fishermen get, and through that process, and China, through buying 2 international freight forwarders, now controls all lobster and the access to the departure of lobster from the Halifax airport. All of those transactions are not reviewable under this act. And the result is that my lobster buyers have to truck their lobster, not to the Halifax airport because China has taken it up. They have to truck it to New York and Chicago to get our lobster to Asia. And that's just a small. We know they're buying farms, they're buying up all kinds of key assets in this country, and none of that gets reviewed. So we would encourage, and we'll be seeking amendments to this bill in committee around moving that threshold for state-owned enterprises to 0 in the Act, requiring the minister to follow that and the department to follow that. The government didn't include any provisions that I can see in the net benefit to that issue of state-owned enterprises in foreign countries actually getting control of industries, let alone a particular asset, and that we're not looking at the concentration control of particularly hostile actors strategically going after that. Now, I know there's a provision in the bill that allows the minister to create a list of targeted industries. So we're a little skeptical that that list will be as comprehensive as it needs to be and will reflect a $0 review, given the record of this government over the last 8 years, where they have not even sought national security reviews on state-owned enterprises from China when they had the authority to do so on those acquisitions. The bill does not include a provision to actually list countries as well. Other countries have looked at that. In addition to selected industries, the minister should have the authority through regulation to have a list of state actors and state countries that we do not believe are advantageous for our economy, or actually a threat to our economy, if they continue to try and buy not only our companies, but the assets of those companies, which I'll come to in a minute. The bill does not include, the bill changes that process, I referred to it earlier, of the involvement of cabinet. So we'll like to probe this a little more in committee, but I understand the need because the 45 days hasn't changed in the bill, in the Act, the Investment Canada Act, and there is a need for speed, obviously. And so there's the question that the minister has put forward here, which is that at the beginning of the process, that the minister, along with the Minister of Public Safety, can determine when that goes in without having to go to cabinet. And that will speed up the process. We believe that is a reasonable thing, but we'll want to explore that a little more in committee. But it's on the other end that we have the problem, because perhaps not all ministers of industry are as diligent as this one, and And I do know, in the short time I've been working with the minister, he is the most accessible minister I've had a chance to work with since I've been in the House. And he is cooperative. So I know he understands and is concerned about what the opposition thinks in terms of looking at amendments of the bills and takes our suggestions seriously. So we want to look at this issue that a minister, perhaps not as diligent as him, would not be as involved to make the right decision when it's determined to be a net benefit or not, or whether it's the research comes back and says it is a national security interest or not. We believe that should always, no matter what the recommendation is for officials, go back to Cabinet for discussion and decision before the final decision is made. The Act does not make any attempts to change definitions of state-owned enterprises or look at the issue of what constitutes control. You don't have to buy 50% of the company to control a company. You can buy small percentages of it. You can get a number of seats on the board. You can change management, which Hytera has, changed management in Sinclair and Norsat. You can change management. None of those things are really looked at very strongly in the bill and need a little more consideration. One of the interesting things brought up by the industry committee at the time of that report, which my friend from the NDP I think was on the committee, was the issue of subsequent takeovers, that a Canadian company may be acquired by a company or an industry that we think is okay, and it gets approved. It's not from a state-owned enterprise. But subsequently, down the road, that company can be bought by a state-owned enterprise. There's no provision in this Act to give the minister the power to, when that happens, to re-look at automatically whether or not in that transaction we should be forcing the divestiture of that Canadian asset from that future transaction of a state-owned enterprise down the road. That's a very important thing because Russia and China are getting more and more aggressive at doing these things, and they come in through the front door, but they also come in through the back door, and we need to be very vigilant about that. The minister mentioned intangible assets. This is a big area, 2009, not so much as part of the economy, but big now. And one of the ways that our economy can be harmed is through not just the purchase of a company, but through the purchase or sale of some of their assets. So it could be simple that they're not taking over one of our mining companies, but one of our mining companies is selling a strategic mining asset, a particular mine, to a state player that we are not comfortable with. It could be that a database gets sold. It could be that a particular artificial intelligence or knowledge-based patent that we have and own in Canada gets sold. That company may still remain Canadian, but more and more companies are looking, when they develop these things, at those assets. Probably the worst example in Canada is Nortel. When Nortel went into bankruptcy, Nortel had the most patents, I believe, of any technology and knowledge-based company in Canada. The Canadian liquidators' responsibility was to maximize whatever they could get for the assets. China quite regularly goes in and pays 4, 5, 6 times what a business is worth. That's what they did in my riding last quarter. They paid 5 times what the business is worth. They paid $10 million for $2 million valued businesses, way below the threshold. When they took advantage of the Nortel situation, and almost all of those patents were sold by the liquidator to a Chinese state-owned enterprise that became what? Huawei. Huawei, which is banned now in the United States, only took the government 5 years to figure that one out. So we helped create Huawei through our weak rules around foreign investment in state-owned enterprises, in assets, not just the companies. So we need to have more study and understanding if we can look at those in committee. And I know the minister is taking this seriously. I see him nodding there. So hopefully we can work with the government to improve the bill. Nonetheless, the bill is an improvement over the existing Act and gives the minister some much-needed clarification in the industry, some much needed clarification. So for the most part at this stage, we will be supporting those, but we will be seeking many, many more amendments in committee. And I look forward to hearing from my very experienced member for the Shadow Minister for Industry from the NDP, who's been in this House a long time and has been on the Industry Committee for a long time, to see what he proposes in terms of his speech, but also his work in the House. So, Madam Speaker, I'll conclude there, and I look forward to the debate by all members in this House on this very, very important bill for Canadians.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable ministre de l'Innovation, des Sciences et de l'Industrie.
First of all, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for his speech, and I think that as I was listening to him very carefully, I think I want to thank him because he gave all the reasons why we need to modernize the law on investment in Canada. A number of examples he mentioned would be addressed by this, I would say, revamping of a law which was crafted in 2009, the last time we did that. And I think I like it because in the way he listed all the reasons why we should be doing that, because by providing more agility to the minister, we will be able to address these questions. My question, and Canadians are watching because it's Friday morning, will the member and will his party support our bill to protect the national security of Canadians? Will you support the bill?
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Minister. I think I made it fairly clear that at second reading we'll be voting for this bill. We want to see a number of improvements in the bill. We are disappointed in the fact that it's taken 8 years to get this bill to Parliament, and that a lot of these decisions that the government made and let go, and the acquisition of many of our assets by Chinese state-owned enterprises, probably wouldn't have happened if the amendments we seek in this bill were in place and would have been in place earlier on in this government's tenure. Wouldn't have had the flexibility of previous industry ministers under this Liberal government to ignore the public security threat.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de
The honourable member for Mirabel. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Now, last year, we learned that the RCMP had allowed Sinclair Technology, a company linked to the Chinese Communist regime, access their internal systems. There was a real failure of monitoring mechanisms and a failure from the government, which didn't prevent this company, partly controlled by China, prevented from accessing these internal systems. And it took quite a while for the government to decide to end this contract. So my question, and my colleague knows Bill C-34 better than I do, so I'd like to hear from him, with the new amendments to the Investment Canada Act, would Sinclair Technology be the type of company that the minister, who is not listening right now, the type of company that the minister would end up paying particular attention to?
Honourable member of South Shore St. Margaret's.
I'd like to thank the member for Mirabel, my seatmate, for that question, even though we're in different parties. It's an important question. I'll answer it this way. The first stage to prevent what happened, and by the way, just because the piece of equipment the RCMP, as the Minister of Public Safety said in committee this week, isn't connected in the data links of the RCMP communication, all the people who service it get access to all the RCMP locations of their equipment and can understand what the RCMP communication structure is and provide that intelligence back to China as it's required under Chinese law. But the issue is, would have been stopped if there had been a national security review. This bill does nothing on procurement. It doesn't have any ability to stop the RCMP and Canadian Border Services from acquiring technologies from China.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for the Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member from South Shore St. Margaret's. I appreciate my work that I do alongside the member in the Fisheries Committee. We know that one of the big components of C-34 is to promote economic security and combating foreign interference by modernizing the Investment Canada Act to strengthen the national security review process and to better mitigate economic security threats arising from foreign investment. And of course, when I think about threats to foreign investment, I immediately, as a fellow fisheries committee member, think of the threats to foreign investment in our fishing industry. And I'm wondering if the member can share his thoughts on how this relates to, as just one example, Royal Greenland's takeover of processing plants in Newfoundland. And if it doesn't relate to that, what do we need to do to move forward in mitigating that? Thank you.
Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the question from my colleague from Nanaimo, Ladysmith. I do really enjoy sitting on the Fisheries Committee with her. She brings in a lot of good value to that committee, and the member for Cape Breton-Canso as well. That's an important question because this is below the threshold. Most of these acquisitions in the fisheries industry, which is a strategic food industry for Canada, is not listed generally in any of the lists I've heard from the minister as an industry that should be protected. Our food industry, and they're below the thresholds for review because these are smaller companies, way below that. The review, whether it's from China or whether it's from the United States. And we're seeing more and more the BC coast, many of our fisheries are owned, licenses are owned by Chinese state-owned enterprises. And in the East Coast, we're seeing the processing side of things, the fish buying things in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia being acquired by countries from all over the world, but primarily China. So there's nothing in this bill that I understand, and I'd like to explore that a little more in committee, that would stop those types of things coming. Perhaps the only thing would be, at this stage, if the minister put fisheries as part of the food strategic investments on his list.
The honourable member will have 4 minutes after question period when this matter is back before the House. Statement by members, déclaration de députés. The honourable member Scarborough Rouge Park.
Madam Speaker, I rise to honour the late Honourable David C. Onley, the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, iconic Canadian broadcaster, educator, disability rights advocate, and a longtime resident of Scarborough Rouge Park. Onley contracted polio when he was just 3, leaving him to use a motorized scooter throughout his life. One of Onley's greatest wish was for all people with disabilities to have the opportunity to fully participate in every aspect of society. He became Canada's first news anchor with a visible disability. In 2007, he became the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, and he used his position to remove physical barriers to Ontario's 1.5 million people with disabilities. After leaving office, Onley continued to inspire and advocate for people with disabilities, namely as a senior lecturer at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, where he taught and inspired a new generation of advocates, including several of my current and former staff. My deepest condolences to his wife, Ruth Ann, sons Jonathan, Robert, and Michael. May he rest in peace, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Madam Speaker, we often hear things like one person can't make a difference. But today I'd like to share a story about someone who proves otherwise. Yvonne Hazeldine, an immigrant to Canada who ran analytical labs by day and raced cars by night, is a trailblazer who is quietly one of the most influential women in Calgary. Yvonne's persistence has elected dozens of candidates, and then that same persistence has held them all to task when it comes to doing what they said they would do. Yvonne's legacy proves that when one woman can change the world. I know I would not be standing here without her support. And when I speak in this place, I often catch myself using the mannerisms and the passion that she exudes. Recently, she's experienced some very severe health challenges. So now it's my turn to lift her up, as she's done so many times for me and my team. On behalf of the entire Calgary community, we love you, Yvonne. You prove one woman can change the world.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Madam Speaker, the long-term care standards were released this week. We will have many opportunities to discuss this document. We must, however, hold fast to the unwavering belief that every senior deserves the right to live in dignity, safety, and comfort, regardless of which province or territory they call home. I'm pleased that this government has made the largest investment in home and community care in Canada's history, an unprecedented $6 billion. Wow. As chair of National Liberal Seniors Caucus, I ask that all governments work together to recognize that the unique and often diverse needs of aging persons is a critical pillar of all healthcare programs and decisions. This is our moment to place partisan politics aside and work collaboratively to support new Canadians. Thank you.
Yes.
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
6 years ago, on January 29th, a gunman entered the Islamic Cultural Centre of Quebec City and murdered 6 Canadians. 2 years ago, a Canadian Muslim family of 4 were killed in a premeditated hit-and-run in London, Ontario. These cowardly crimes have terrorized Canadians. Hate is growing from the far right across Canada. Police reported hate crimes have increased 72% over the last 2 years. The Liberal government has been dragging its feet in fighting Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and fighting against hate and all forms of racism and bigotry. New Democrats have been calling for concrete measures to protect all Canadians. Canadians expect their political leaders to fight against hatred and work with people and communities who are at the forefront of this fight. New Democrats stand and mourn with the families of the victims of that horrific night. And we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to stand up to Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, racism, and indeed hate in all its toxic forms.
The honourable member for Don Valley North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning. In 2016, this House officially recognized the first day of the Lunar New Year as the beginning of the 15-day Spring Festival celebration amongst the Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and other Asian communities across our country. This past Tuesday, together with 30-plus caucus colleagues and the Right Honourable Prime Minister, we held Lunar New Year celebration on Parliament Hill. For the first time in many years, over 500 guests attended the event where we enjoyed authentic Chinese cuisine, traditional Korean dance, the lion dance, and exchanged best wishes. Speaker, as a Chinese Canadian, I am so proud to have participated in such important celebration on the Hill, which showcased Canada's diversity and inclusiveness. Through you, Speaker, to all members of this House, 新年快乐，恭喜发财. Thank you.
The honourable member for Parry Sound.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister's inflationary policies, driving up prices and interest rates, the cost of living is crippling for many Canadians, especially those looking for a home. Rent has doubled, if you can find a place to rent, that is. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, mortgages have doubled as well. 9 out of 10 young people in this country that don't own a home believe they never will. After 8 years of a Prime Minister whose fiscal policy could best be described as borrow lots, think later, a lot of Canadians going to the bank this year to renew their mortgages are not sure if they can afford their homes anymore. Even Liberal MPs are complaining about the cost of their mortgages to me. These are dark days, Madam Speaker, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. The City of Victoria is adding the missing middle. Ontario is pushing out NIMBY local politicians, and the City of Saskatoon guarantees a building permit in 5 days. The best news of all, Madam Speaker, a Conservative government is just around the corner.
And I'll just apologize to the member. I forgot to mention Parry Sound, Muskoka, and they're all important, those towns. The honourable member for Milton.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Over the last year, the Conservation Authority in my riding, Conservation Halton, has planted close to 80,000 trees. They've restored stream habitat, managed 11,000 acres of land, hired over 800 young people to work in nature. They've maintained 116 kilometers of trails, monitored aquatic and terrestrial habitat, as well as water quality at 325 monitoring stations. They've carried out 45 major environmental restoration projects, and they also protect Crawford Lake, which has rich Indigenous history and one of the coolest Miromictic lakes in the world. The over 1.3 million visitors to their 8 parks last year spent 3 million hours in nature and walked over 6 million kilometers on their trails. They also taught more people ever to ski and camp, including programs for new Canadians. They donated over 400 annual park passes to local libraries so that anyone can borrow a pass and access their parks for free. And they also held their 3rd annual Pride in Nature event to show solidarity with LGBTQ2+ community members, and so much more. And despite all that, Madam Speaker, conservation authorities in our Greenbelt are being threatened by the notion that you just can't build homes without destroying nature. I reject that notion, Madam Speaker. The integrity of our Greenbelt must be protected. Green spaces are our greatest asset, and I'm proud to recommit myself to being a strong and effective voice for conservation and the Greenbelt in Milton and across Canada.
The honourable member Halifax West.
Madam Speaker, Valentine's is almost here. Time to celebrate love and affection and time to lend a hand. Today, I'm grateful to represent a community full of incredible volunteers with big hearts, and I want to give a special shout out to Square Roots, Fairview Clayton Park, Santa for Seniors, and Shabakto Links, who have come together to launch the Valentine's Veggies for Seniors program. You might have caught this on CTV, but here's how the program works. You sponsor a Valentine by sending $5 to info@shabaktolinks.ca. Then their team identifies a local senior who could use food support and delivers a gift of fresh veggies and fruits to their door. How thoughtful is that? For those who want to be a sponsor or refer a senior, you have until February 5th at midnight. Many thanks go out to these selfless folks who have brought this wonderful initiative. So, Madam Speaker, this is community love and affection at best. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canada is facing a crime wave. Since the Prime Minister was elected, violent crime is up 32%. Violent gang crime is up a staggering 92%. And in 2021, there were 124,000 more violent criminal incidents compared to 2015 when this Prime Minister was elected. This is not a coincidence. Whether it's the Liberals' catch-and-release bail policies, eliminating mandatory jail time for serious gun crime, and drastically expanding house arrest for such serious offenses as sexual assault and kidnapping, the crime wave is a direct result of failed soft-on-crime Liberal policies. The only way to defeat this violent crime wave is to defeat this soft-on-crime Liberal government and elect a Conservative government committed to standing up for victims and holding violent criminals to account to the fullest extent of the law.
The honourable member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Madam Speaker, it's the winter time of year, and Bonsu Carnival is here. This year, Bonsu is celebrating its 60th anniversary, making it one of the oldest and best winter carnivals in all of Canada. For the next 9 days, there will be daytime and evening events, some timeless and some brand new, all packed with fun and excitement for all families of all ages. Come and participate in the Sioux in some of the timeless favors like the polar bear dip. And if you can do it this year, this weather, I can tell you, you're going to get a special award. There's also new ones like the Polar Rush Urban Winter Obstacle Challenge or the Coldest Canuck Challenge. Many more to add to this, plus the pancake breakfast that everyone looks forward to. There's no shortage of snow in my riding, so I invite each and every member of this House and everyone across Canada to come to the Sioux and enjoy the best winter carnival, one of the oldest winter carnivals, and a special thank you to all the volunteers that make this winter carnival what it is today. Madam Speaker, I know the people in our area are really going to enjoy this year's winter carnival.
The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of incompetence and corruption, Canada is broken. Trust in government, broken. Ministerial responsibility, broken. After 8 years, our military has been decimated. Military procurement, broken. Military recruitment, broken. After 8 years, violent crime is rampant. The bail system, broken. The overwhelmed court system, broken. After 8 years, overdoses are killing thousands. Addiction support, broken. Safe supply ideology, broken. After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his cronies, Canada is broken. Canadians are being killed in random attacks. Canadians are being killed by dangerous drugs. Canadians are dying deaths of despair. After 8 years, we went from sunny ways to dark days. It doesn't have to be this way. Conservatives have a plan to turn the hurt Canadians are feeling into the hope they need. After 8 years of division, 8 years of wedge politics, we'll bring Canadians together, united, strong, and free.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Calgary, Midnapore.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this government's inflationary spending, Canadians are barely getting by, while Liberal insiders and high-priced consultants have never had it so good. After 8 years, Canadians have been struggling to cope with 40-year high inflation. After 8 years, 1.5 million Canadians have visited food banks in a single month. But after 8 years, this government doesn't care. Instead of helping Canadians, they decided to hand out over $100 million in contracts to their friends at McKinsey & Company, and that number keeps climbing. In fact, after 8 years, we still don't know the full amount awarded to McKinsey because this Liberal government refuses to say. But we do know that of the 23 contracts awarded, 20 of them were granted in a non-competitive environment and hand-picked by this government. We need to know how much has been handed out to McKinsey and the influence they have on our government. Canadians deserve answers, and we won't back down.
You're here. Well done.
Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, for many families in Canada, Madam Speaker, the tradition is to have multi-generational homes. How wonderful it is when you go and you visit a home, and not only do you see the child and the parent, but you also see the grandparent. Not only does the family benefit, but so does our communities. An elderly grandparent with their daughter's family, or a son with a disability with their parents. These arrangements can be an important way for them to take care of each other. Our government supports, Madam Speaker, multi-generational homes, and this year the multi-generational home renovation tax credit will be well underway. It provides up to $7,500 in support for constructing a secondary suite for a senior or an adult with a disability, Madam Speaker. This refundable credit would allow families to claim 15% of up to $50,000 in eligible renovations and construction costs incurred in order to construct a secondary suite. Madam Speaker, this is a great way to support families here in Canada.
Bravo.
Bravo.
Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to shine a light on the incredible contributions made by a constituent in my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith, Shalima Gant, and the organization she founded, the Nanaimo African Heritage Society, or NAHS. For over 20 years, Shalima and those in the NAHS have created opportunities to celebrate and learn African heritage and the history and culture of Black people in Canada and on Vancouver Island. The Society welcomes people of all ethnicities to experience, learn about, and honor African culture, both local and worldwide. From the NAHS magazine to a variety of workshops, performances, rallies, and other activities, NAHS strives to inspire and inform the public on issues of social justice, community stewardship, and anti-racism. February is Black History Month. This month and every month, I'm grateful for the work of the Nanaimo African Heritage Society for all they do to share the rich heritage of African culture in Nanaimo.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, if I'm feeling festive today, it's because the Club Bouliste de Bécomo is celebrating its 60th anniversary. You're wondering, what is boulisme? Well, it's lawn bowling. So the Bécomo Lawn Bowlers Club is exceptional in that it brings together all generations. Imagine, of the 200 regular players, 90 people are young, or 90 of them are young people, rather. Last year, during the family tournament, a team made up of 4 generations of the same family was able to compete. You have to admit that it's pretty rare to see something like that in football or hockey. That being said, this is a memorable moment that shows the unifying and intergenerational spirit that the club wants to support. Under the leadership of its president, Ms. Francine Belair, the Bécomo Lawn Bowlers Club is the envy of many. It's considered an example throughout Quebec for its dynamism in Canada and internationally. I'll end with these words. Dear bowlers, happy 60th anniversary. As a gift, I promise you a game, but unlike my last 3 elections, I promise you that I'll lose.
L'honorable député de Montmagny.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Liselec, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, after 8 years in power, the Liberal government couldn't have done worse. Inflation is at its highest level in 40 years. Interest rates have risen 9 times in the last year after the Prime Minister and his Minister of Finance said as recently as 6 months ago that they'd stay low. As a result, young people can no longer dream of buying a house. The cost of rent has shot up. Grocery costs are rising steadily, and that's hurting families. After doubling the national debt, which will no doubt cost twice as much in interest, the government's proven beyond any doubt that it can't be trusted. And that's not to mention the justice system that's broken across Canada. Repeat offenders can serve their sentences in the community rather than in prison. Violence has increased by 32% since 2015. Gang violence is up 90% in that same period. It's time for this NDP Liberal coalition to let a competent team run the country. Madam Speaker, the Conservatives.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Madam Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Cape Breton-Canso, I rise today to pay tribute to Leon Dubinsky, an extraordinary Cape Bretoner who we lost just a few weeks ago. Leon Dubinsky was a pillar in the realm of arts and culture across Cape Breton Island. As an actor, theatre director, and composer, he spent his entire life entertaining Canadians, and in particular, Atlantic Canadians. Leon is probably best known for his unofficial Cape Breton anthem, Rise Again, a song of resilience and hope for those at home. And Madam Speaker, it rose to the top of various charts, won multiple awards, and went on to be recorded by the likes of the Rankin family, Rita McNeil, and Anne Murray. Madam Speaker, taking inspiration from Leon's own lyrics, I know that he'll rise again in the face of his child, and I know he'll rise again in the voices of his song. My thoughts and prayers remain with Leon's loved ones at this time. May he rest in peace, and may he rise again. Bravo.
Oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years of failed Liberal policies driving up inflation, Canadians are faced with high interest rates, higher mortgage payments, and seeing home prices double across the country. An average monthly mortgage under this government has more than doubled, going from $1,500 to more than $3,000. Home ownership is also impossible and a pipe dream for 9 out of 10 young people, as 35-year-olds are forced to continue to live in their parents' basements. Let's be clear, Liberal inflation caused this mess. Will they apologize and take responsibility for pricing young Canadians out of homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, our plan not only makes life more affordable for Canadians, but is also fiscally responsible. We have confirmed our AAA credit rating. We have recovered 121% of our jobs lost during the pandemic, while the United States has only recovered 106%. We have maintained the lowest deficit and the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7. That positions us very well to get inflation under control, improve affordability, and make sure that we create good, sustainable jobs for Canadians.
8 years of failed Liberal policies, Canadians have never had it so bad. And as Liberals continue to fist bump each other for spending hundreds of billions of dollars of other people's money, the results are absolutely horrific. 1 in 5 Canadians are completely out of money. 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals. And not only did Liberal inflation drive up the price of everything, they pile drive Canadians by raising taxes on them. Why are they so intent on taking more money from Canadians, leaving hardworking people and their family with less money and empty stomachs?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship.
Madam Speaker, I'm getting tired of listening to the Conservatives talk down Canadians and the Canadian economy. They should be getting to work to support Canadians in their time of need. We've made efforts through this pandemic to make sure that families could continue to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. We made efforts to make sure businesses could keep their doors open and the lights on. Every step of the way, they have opposed these measures. We're going to be there for Canadians in their time of need because it's the right thing to do. The Conservative strategy to combat inflation is to take more money away from families. We will be there for them in the time of need, no matter what it takes.
Yes, I want to remind members that when someone has the floor that they should be listening to the answer. They may not like the answer, but they should listen to it. The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn wasn't interrupted during his question, and I would ask the same respect for when the answers are there. So the Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
We won't take advice from the guy who broke the immigration system. And after 8 years, the Liberals continue to deny any responsibility for the Liberal inflation that they caused, causing all the pain on Canadians. But you know what? There's a list of random Liberals who prove that they are responsible. Tiff Macklem, who said inflation is homegrown. Mark Carney said inflation is a domestic issue. Bill Morneau admitted that the Liberals overspent. Even former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said Liberal spending is fueling inflation. So should we believe these random Liberals that continue to say that everything is rosy and fine, or should we believe the other random Liberals who say it's their fault for causing inflation?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship.
Speaker, I'd point out to the honourable member who I had the pleasure of serving on the immigration portfolio with that during the next year we expect to welcome more than double the number of newcomers to this country than they did the last year that they formed government. Madam Speaker, at the same time, our strategy to support Canadians over the course of the pandemic, a once-in-a-century disaster, was successful in making sure that 9 million Canadians received CERB so they could keep food on the table. They opposed those measures. We introduced the wage subsidy that had 4.5 million workers kept on payroll so they could feed their families. They opposed those measures. They didn't just oppose them. Their leader held a press conference to say these are big, fat government programs. Conservatives would never support that. Canadians deserve it.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition. It's quite ironic to hear the Liberals, Madam Speaker, day in, day out, claiming that everything is fine in this country because of their astronomical spending that has caused the country to face the greatest inflation in 40 years. The cost of food has skyrocketed, but they're not responsible. Rents have doubled. Not their fault. Interest rates are making it impossible for young families to dream of owning a home. Not their fault. Why, after 8 years, is this Prime Minister so irresponsible regarding the problems of Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I understand the reasons for which the Conservatives find it hard to connect with Quebecers. It's because their economic policy is simply one of austerity and cuts. On this side of the House, we have implemented a number of measures to support Canadians and Quebecers. We increased benefits for seniors. We created a new benefit to help families pay for their rent. We have created a subsidy program for dental care for youth. Every single time the Conservatives voted against. The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition. We have to listen to the Minister. But listen to us. They are still boasting. After 8 years, they are so disconnected from reality. Middle-class families are increasingly turning to food banks. An ever greater number of Quebecers, and we saw in the news this morning, have to find a second job simply just to pay for food. Seniors, after having worked hard all their lives, are now asking for help to eat. Once again, the Minister will tell us how much they've done to help, but the real question is, why, and that she should be asking herself, is why are so many people suffering after 8 years of this Prime Minister? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, it is true that the world economic situation is unstable, and that is the reason for which we have to be here to support Canadians and Quebecers, Madam Speaker. I don't understand how my colleague can claim to have compassion for Canadians who are finding it hard to make ends meet, whilst voting against measures that will actually help them out, Madam Speaker. We will always be here to support Canadians. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, Quebec schools are feeling the full impact of Roxham Road. Since the start of the school year last September alone, Quebec has had to open 224 new classes just to accommodate the children of asylum seekers. 224 new classes while we are in the midst of a teacher and specialist shortage. 224 new classes, the vast majority in the Montreal area, where schools are already filled far beyond capacity. There is a human cost to this, and I'll come back to that. But first of all, is the federal government committed to footing the bill, at least footing the bill? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Madam Speaker, we must respect our internal and external commitments for asylum seekers. I have a meeting today with my Quebec counterpart so that we can continue to support asylum seekers and to continue to respect international and domestic rules and regulations. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, we are short-staffed in our classrooms. We simply cannot give our teachers more and more children who don't speak French and who are more likely to have special needs. The elastic is stretched to the very limit. To pull it further is to cut the quality of education offered to all children. Quebec does not have the resources to deal with all the asylum seekers on Roxham Road by itself. That is the reality of the matter. When will the government finally suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement and distribute the reception of asylum seekers across Canada? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, my colleague would simply just shift the problem elsewhere. It is essential to have a strategy in collaboration with the province of Quebec.
Counterparts in Quebec, as we have to support efforts to provide housing for asylum seekers, as we have to support healthcare for asylum seekers. I have a meeting this afternoon with Minister Frechette to discuss some of these issues, and I look forward to continuing our partnership to collaborate as we move towards a long-term solution with a modernized Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States.
The member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Canadians can't get their sick children care because our hospitals are struggling with staffing shortages. Nursing vacancies are up by 494% since the Liberals took office. That's almost 29,000 unfilled nursing positions in hospitals and clinics across the country. In the last election, the Liberals promised to hire thousands of healthcare workers. Incredulously, they've done the opposite, Madam Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister letting staffing shortages get worse and failing to protect Canada's universal public health care that is so important to Canadians?
Hear, hear.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health and Sports.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We share the deep concerns that Canadians have regarding the significant challenges that our healthcare system is experiencing when we recognize that urgent actions are necessary to address the current healthcare worker crisis. In fact, Madam Speaker, in the Health Committee, we've just finished our study on the human resources challenge in healthcare, and we're continuing to work with provinces and territories to deliver real results for people. That's better access to family health teams, including more doctors, more nurses where there aren't enough, better access to digital health information, better mental health care, and helping to age with dignity, things that Canadians need. We will always be here to support and stand up for our public universal healthcare system. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Madam Speaker, every community deserves to feel safe, and that's what C-21 was originally intended to do, end handgun violence. Instead, the Liberals introduced amendments at the 11th hour that would make it harder for Indigenous people, farmers, and hunters to support their families and put food on their tables. Today, the Liberals finally dropped the amendments that the Assembly of First Nations said would go against their treaty rights. Will the Minister apologize for the mess he made with these amendments?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment and Climate Change.
No, it's me.
Sir.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it gives me pleasure to rise to respond to the honourable member's question. We are committed and promised Canadians that we would take action on gun violence. The amendments that the honourable member has referred to in Bill C-21, which I would add is an important bill that will deal with gun violence, but on those particular amendments, I will acknowledge there was not enough consultation, there were not enough conversations with Indigenous peoples across the country, and that's why we're committed in our committee, and I look forward to working with the honourable member, to listening to the concerns and to making sure that our legislation is one that will protect public safety and keep Canadians safe.
Apologize. It's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. So the honourable member for Calgary-Bindapore.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years and over $100 million spent, this government is still not admitting their close relationship with Dominique Barton and McKinsey. But close friends have dinner at each other's homes. Close friends embrace each other warmly when they greet each other. Madam Speaker, Canadians know how close the Liberal government and McKinsey and Company are. So why doesn't the government just admit it and tell us how much they've spent on McKinsey and Company?
Great question. Great question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday at the HoC Committee, this member and her colleagues came to try to prove two things. One, that Dominique Barton was a close personal friend of the Prime Minister's, and number two, that Dominique Barton was involved in McKinsey getting contracts from the government. They failed abjectly. Dominique Barton said he wasn't even a friend of the Prime Minister, doesn't even have his phone number, didn't ever socialize with him, and he was never involved in McKinsey securing contracts from the government. Failure by the Conservatives on Tuesday.
The honourable member for Calgary-Bindapore.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years, we know that this Liberal government has spent at least $100 million on contracts with McKinsey, but they're still actually trying to hide how much they have spent on the total amount of contracts. Canadians are demanding answers, and so on Monday, we're going to ask at committee again how much they've actually spent on contracts with McKinsey and Company. But before then, I'm going to give them another chance today, Madam Speaker. How much have you spent on contracts with McKinsey and Company and Dominique Barton?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Member heard, Dominique Barton has left McKinsey for years, is no longer a shareholder at McKinsey, so Dominique Barton's name shouldn't be part of that. Public Services and Procurement Canada is responsible for $104 million of contracts with McKinsey since 2015. There are other smaller contracts that have been given by other departments. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, the government is very unsure, and we get new numbers often. I expect that we'll get a new higher number on Monday, but we'll be unsure if we can take the government at its word because they continue to shovel money out the door to their insider friends at McKinsey. Public servants have said that they've been treated to some colorful presentations, but not much else. And after 8 years of these Liberals, they're more than happy to keep shoveling that money with no value to Canadians. So the question still stands, and we haven't got the final and full answer. Can the Parliamentary Secretary tell us how much money did they give their insider friends at McKinsey?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is generally zero because there are no insider friends that got any money.
I don't understand.
Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Madam Speaker, the question is then, who's lying? The Prime Minister said that Dominique Barton was his friend. Dominique Barton has said that he's not the Prime Minister's friend. And look, I don't blame him. I wouldn't admit that that was a friendship either. But this is a company in McKinsey that helped track down and punish Saudi dissidents, people who are critical of their government there. This is a company in McKinsey that helped supercharge the opioid crisis, paying bonuses to pharmacists who were responsible for overdose deaths.
Great job.
Speaker, one thing I would say is I'm proud to be a friend of that Honourable Member because we can, across party lines, still agree on a lot of things. And I think that's important here because a lot of times we yell and scream at each other, and it's important to say that people are able to work together despite their differences. With respect to the global question of that, we do need to look at our integrity regime to see if companies responsible for bad acts abroad should not be eligible for government contracts. That is one of the things that OGO is looking at, and I look forward to working with the Honourable Member on that question.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, my thoughts are for the 300 staff of Medicago who are out of a job because it closed 2 years ago. This Liberal government invested $173 million of taxpayer money in this company to produce a vaccine that was produced, but that was not and that will never be recognized by the WHO. Why? Because Medicago was partly owned by Philip Morris of the tobacco industry, and the WHO never recognizes the work of the tobacco industry. Why was the government so negligent? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Indeed, we are currently working to preserve jobs, to preserve technology, to preserve intellectual property. Our priority is that today, Madam Speaker. We are in solution mode. I was in contact with our colleagues from Quebec City and the Mayor of Montreal. I also talked to the CEO of Mitsubishi in Japan. We are in solution mode to preserve these jobs because our priority today are the people in Quebec City that are studying the matter. We want to work with them, and we are in solution mode for the next few weeks. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Perhaps the government should have been in check mode to check things out and make sure they are good. The WHO decided that no subsidies or any acknowledgement would be given to companies that are partly owned by tobacco companies. That was in 2003. The government signed that agreement back in 2003. On the 23rd of December 2022, the minister said to Le Soleil that he was surprised by the WHO's decision. This agreement existed in 2003 and still does today. $173 million. How much did Philip Morris make out of this money? Can we be sure that this money... End of question, inaudible for the interpreter. I would like to remind my honourable colleague, for whom I have a lot of respect, at the time we were in prevention mode because we have to remember at the time science did not tell us specifically what kind of vaccine would be required. Canada was one of the rare countries in the world that invested in various vaccine families for the safety of Canadians, as I said this morning. It's not recriminations we have to do, we have to think about solutions. I was talking to CEOs throughout the country up to midnight yesterday to find and save jobs, technology and intellectual property. The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Madam Speaker, employment insurance delays are at an all-time high. Currently, a quarter of all claims are being processed late, and of these delays, more than half of them are over 50 days late. 50 days. For people with no income, this has led to officials advising unemployed people to go to food banks or to be supported by their spouses. And the worst thing is that during this time, the minister was cutting their employees' working hours. When will she fix this fiasco? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Families, Children and Social Development. Thank you to my colleague for the question.
Speaker, when Canadians lose their jobs and when Quebecers lose their jobs, we know that they rely on the EI system to be that first point of contact for them. We know that some people have been experiencing delays during this time, and we've been working very carefully with those claimants to ensure that they get their payments. With regards to the staffing issues, the Minister said quite clearly yesterday that we are addressing this. We want to make sure that the first point of contact for Quebecers or for any Canadian in calling an EI call centre is that they get the service that they need, and we've committed to working with Service Canada to ensure that full employment is in place. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Madam Speaker, what we are experiencing today with employment insurance is a fiasco, a new passport crisis, except that federal victims are not waiting to travel. They're waiting to feed themselves, to buy groceries. Service Canada has transformed into No Service Canada. This government is just sailing from crisis to crisis to crisis. It is putting out one fire on the left, whilst two fires are burning bright on the right. When will the Minister finally ensure that Service Canada is actually able to provide its namesake services? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I'd just like to mention that the EI program is currently coming out of its annual winter peak period, and the department had been fully mobilized its workforce to get clients in to pay as quickly as possible. In 2022-2023, the average number of wait times was 24 days for Canadians across the country, and 76% of EI payments were made within 28 days, which was within the standard. We know there are people who are waiting. We know it is a sensitive issue, which is why we are ensuring that claimants that are experiencing delays are getting the service that they need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, the bail system is broken. The Liberals implemented soft-on-crime, catch-and-release bail policies, putting violent and repeat offenders out on the streets, endangering public safety. Everyone but these Liberals seems to recognize what a disaster this has been. It's why all 13 premiers, police associations, and victims are calling on the Liberals to fix their broken bail system. Why won't they?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve to be and feel safe. We all have a role to play in protecting communities. The laws on bail are very clear. If accused poses a serious risk to public safety, they should be denied bail. At our direction, federal officials have been working for months with their provincial territorial counterparts to develop ways to best keep Canadians safe. We need lasting solutions that are tough when they need to be tough, but also address underlying issues like mental health, addiction, and homelessness. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, the Liberals' catch-and-release bail policies have cost lives, including last December a young OPP constable who was murdered in the line of duty by a violent career criminal out on bail, notwithstanding that he was facing such serious charges as assaulting a police officer. Now a police officer is dead. How many more lives need to be lost before the Liberals finally wake up and fix their broken bail system?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, our heart goes out to those who are impacted by violence, and especially gun violence. I want to just say that as bail is concerned, there is no right to bail if you pose a serious risk to public safety. There's, in fact, a reverse onus for bail imposed on accused charged with certain firearms offences, including offences involving a firearm committed while subject to weapons prohibition order. And in this case, we will continue to work with the provinces and territories to ensure that bail is accessible, but at the same time limited to those who do not pose a risk to public safety.
Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, 8 years ago, Constable David Wynn of the St. Albert RCMP was gunned down by a violent repeat offender who was mistakenly released on bail. The system failed, but after 8 years of this Prime Minister, a tragic mistake has become a matter of government policy. Deliberately releasing violent repeat offenders on bail who kill innocent police officers and victims. When will this Prime Minister acknowledge his failure and fix his broken justice system?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let me be very clear on bail. The laws on bail limit those who do not pose a risk to public safety to be released on bail. If you look at the criminal justice system as a whole, we have a shared responsibility with the provincial and territorial governments. With respect to the federal government, we are responsible for the criminal code. The federal government is working with the provinces and territories to ensure that the administration of justice is strengthened, and we will work with them in order to get to the right place on bail, Madam Speaker.
I just want to remind members that if they don't have the floor, then they shouldn't be speaking, and there shouldn't be debate going on back and forth while others have the floor. The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, police officers, victims, and the provinces are calling on this Prime Minister to fix this broken justice system. And after 8 years of this Liberal government, it has never been easier for violent repeat offenders to be released. If these Liberals don't believe it, the proof is in the pudding. Out of 44 gang-related homicides in Toronto in 2022, 24 were committed by those out on bail. The consequences of this Prime Minister's catch-and-release justice agenda are fatal. After 8 years of failure, when will this Prime Minister take responsibility and fix this broken justice system?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Sadly, Madam Speaker, there is none among us who have not been subject to the effects of violence. All of us know people who are victims. Every single one of us share an equal commitment to making sure that justice is served and our communities are kept safe. The reality is Canada enjoys one of the greatest reputations in the world for its justice system. We have one of the lowest rates of recidivism anywhere in the world. And the policies the Conservatives advocated were struck down by the courts again and again. And by the way, were tried in jurisdictions like the United States, where even the father of that movement, Newt Gingrich, said it was an abject failure.
Hear, hear. For Nunavut.
In my regards to the family and friends of the late Dale Culver, you deserve justice. It is absolutely incredible that it has taken 6 years to charge 5 RCMP officers in his death. An Indigenous policing bill should have been introduced long ago, like the Liberals had promised. It is clear the Liberals will only take incremental steps to ensure justice for Indigenous peoples. When will this government pass legislation so Indigenous peoples can keep themselves safe?
Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations.
I would like to start off by thanking the member opposite for her advocacy. This is an important subject that we have to get right in Canada. As an Indigenous person who lives in an Indigenous community, I'm aware of the complexities, but also the need for an Indigenous policing legislation and Indigenous policing commitments. That's why our government put almost $1 billion into 2020 budget to ensure that we're moving forward on Indigenous policing, and we're going to do so because we owe a debt to Indigenous people across this country so that they can be safe and secure in their places where they reside. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
My hand.
Oh, sorry. The Honourable Member, no, I'm going to restart. I jumped one by mistake. The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I raise my hands to the member from Nunavut. Living with a disability shouldn't mean living in poverty, but for 1 million Canadians, this is exactly what it means. The Canada Disability Benefit is at least a year away, and as Canadians wait for it, the cost of living continues to rise. The situation is dire, Madam Speaker, as people skip meals and contemplate MAID. They need financial support now. Will the Liberals provide a disability emergency relief benefit immediately to close that income gap?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for her question and for her tireless advocacy. In Canada, no person with a disability should live in poverty, and that's why we are committed to creating the Canada Disability Benefit, a thoughtfully designed income supplement with the potential to seriously reduce poverty and improve financial security for hundreds of thousands of working-age Canadians with disabilities from coast to coast to coast. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to say that yesterday Bill C-22 passed unanimously in the House. We look forward to seeing it move through the Senate. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. We know Canada has great potential and talent to be a leader in new technology and innovation. Can the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry update this House on what our government is doing to improve Canada's competitiveness as an innovative nation? Thank you.
Madam Speaker, today was a great day for one of our Canadian champions. Madam Speaker, OpenText made its debut on the NASDAQ today, Madam Speaker. One of the largest software company in the world. And not only that, Madam Speaker, for the first time in Canadian history, the bell of the NASDAQ was ranked from Canada, from here in Ottawa. So I would say to all Canadians and to all members, if you know someone, an employee at OpenText, it's thanks to their talent, know-how, and expertise that we can celebrate. Just send them a letter, send them a text message, give them a phone call. They made all of us Canadians proud today.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Madam Speaker, after 8 long years of this government, crime has surged to a level not seen in decades. Not only are communities subjected to daily shootings and stabbings, but now they worry about random attacks in their subways. Rapists are let out on bail the same day the police take them down to the courthouse. Public safety is not some graduate project for a criminologist. Its implementation has deadly consequences if we don't get it right. So instead of creating repeat victims, why doesn't this government listen to the provinces and deal with repeat offenders?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as someone who lives close to the City of Toronto and uses the TTC, I am deeply concerned about the spike in violence on the TTC. The Minister has spoken with Mayor Tory to express our support for him and the City of Toronto. Our government has taken action on supporting law enforcement, on violence prevention, on mental health supports. And most recently, the Minister was in Toronto to announce $12 million in support, along with the Mayor, to address many of the social determinants that can lead to violence through the Building Safer Communities Fund. We'll continue to work with the City of Toronto and all communities to keep communities safe.
For Red Deer Lacombe.
Madam Speaker, in 2022, 5 Canadian police officers were killed in a deadly 37-day stretch. The President of the Police Association of Ontario has called this unprecedented. All the while, shootings continue in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Drugs, guns, and contraband continue to flow across the border, and repeat offenders are out on bail, allowed to continue harming society unmitigated. We know that this Prime Minister has been convicted of 2 ethics offences on separate occasions in the last 8 years. So is that why this government is so afraid to deal with repeat offenders?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I am proud of the record on this side of the House that we have taken when it comes to keeping communities safe, whether that be investing in the border and replacing the money that was taken away by the Conservative government when they were in power. We are giving the tools to the Canadian Border Services Agency to keep the borders safe, to ensure that guns are not being smuggled across the border. There's always more to do, Madam Speaker, and we will support law enforcement, we will support communities, and we will do everything we can to ensure that Canadians are safe.
L'honorable député de Montmagny.
The Honourable Member from Montmagny, Liselé, Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup.
Well, Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, our towns are less safe than they have ever been. Crime rates have increased by 32%, and gang-related crimes have almost doubled. All of this because of this government's lax policies, which facilitate bail for violent criminals and have eliminated mandatory minimums for firearms-related crime. Madam Speaker, when will this government finally take our street violence seriously? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, my colleague is raising a critical issue for Montreal, Quebec, and everywhere in the country. And I'd like to know if he cares about firearms-related violence and crime, why do the Conservatives systematically block measures that are for exactly that, to better control firearms in Canada? Madam Speaker, we have a bill on the table right now, C-21, to ensure that we end the sale of handguns throughout the country. And the Conservatives are opposing that. The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, this government is behaving like there's no problem, but Canadians can see the direct impacts of this government's bad policy. Nearly half of gun-related homicides in Toronto last year were committed by individuals out on bail. The last thing that Canadians want is to see this spread throughout the country. We need to overhaul the bail system. Will this government show the courage to do so, and if so, will it vote for our motion? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to answer a second question on the issue of firearms violence. But I'm surprised to hear it from the Conservatives, Madam Speaker, because, Madam Speaker, we've been watching violence against women, violence among youth. We've been watching those rates increase with guns. So why are the Conservatives against our measures to better control firearms in this country? The Honourable Member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, yesterday, Australia announced that it would be removing the British monarchy from its banknotes. Charles III will be replaced by Indigenous art. This is a modern and democratic example that Canada should follow. Because it may not seem like much, but banknotes is how countries present themselves to the world, and Australia is choosing to put forward its own culture and its own people. But Canada is instead putting forward a foreign monarch and the authoritarian heritage it represents. It's 2023. Isn't it time for this to change? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I've been closely following Australia's decision. And it's important to consider the future of the monarchy in Canada. People have widely diverging opinions on this. Up until now, the monarchy has worked well for Canada. But I do think that my colleague's position is interesting. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I was talking about banknotes specifically. I think it's time to move on. And in any case, Canada is going to need to replace its currency. So while it's at it, does anyone really want to see King Charles on the banknotes? Of course, it's not up to the Bloc Québécois to choose Canada's symbols, but it's hard to believe that Canada can't find something better in its 150 years of history. Canada is a democratic country. Why would it once again choose a foreign monarchy and its heritage of racism and violence, including towards Indigenous people and Francophones? Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and the Treasury Board. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, and I would say that in 2018, the Canadian government launched a competition to place a woman on a banknote for the first time in our history. And I'm very pleased that Viola Desmond was chosen. She's now on the $10 bill. And now it's time to see how we can replace the image on the $5 bill. Madam Speaker, we will be constantly renewing our Canadian institutions.
Edmonton Manning. Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, inflation is at record levels. Grocery prices were up 11% last year. Liberal tax hikes makes things worse, and they are planning more of them. The wind chill in Ottawa today is -40 below. but this is not as cold as this government's heart. They cause this problem. When will they cancel their tax hikes? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, first of all, we've lowered taxes for middle-class Canadians twice. We've lowered taxes for small businesses twice. And it's important that the opposition understands that inflation is...
Il n'y a pas d'interprétation. Does it work now? Is it working now? Yeah? Okay, so if the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary can restart his answer.
I want to restart my answer, Madam Speaker, because it gives me a second opportunity to talk about how we've lowered taxes for middle-class Canadians twice. We've lowered taxes for small business twice. And when it comes to global inflation, it is in fact global. It's too high in Canada at 6.3%, but it is higher in our economic peers. It's 6.5% in Europe. It's over in the United States, over 9% in Europe, over 10% in the OECD. But we should be encouraged that inflation is actually coming down in Canada. We have a strong fiscal framework that allows us to invest in affordability, in good, clean jobs, and making sure that we build an economy that works for everyone.
The Honourable Member Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals have put BC families in an impossible position with their inflationary spending. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, the price of gas, rent, and groceries have all skyrocketed. Half of Canadians are now worried they can't properly feed their families. Meanwhile, the Liberals are dishing out multi-million-dollar contracts to friendly friends. When will the Liberal government stop lining the pockets of their friendly friends and start focusing on everyday Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I always hope that we can certainly be friendly with our colleagues across the way. Madam Speaker, I really find it difficult and challenging that, the Conservatives seem to have this tactic of saying one thing but doing something else. They say they're really concerned about Canadians, but they vote against our measures for, whether it's for rental and dental, they vote against our measures in terms of protecting workers, they vote against our measures in terms of cutting taxes on the middle class. They even wanted in their campaign proposals to cut childcare in this to cut the childcare agreements in this country. So they're not really there for Canadians. Not so friendly.
It was Maple Ridge.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are having a hard time paying for everything, including imported vegetables. Life has never been so expensive. An innovative and environmentally safe agribusiness is ready to open in my community, but is concerned with upcoming Liberal restrictions. Question: why does this Liberal government have no problems spending billions on friendly consultants, but seems determined to make life more difficult and expensive for hardworking Canadians?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Canada is working and Canadians are working. In fact, they're working in record numbers. Over 659,000 jobs created since the pandemic. It's actually what allows us to invest in making life more affordable, by protecting and increasing retirement security for seniors, by investing in dental care for children. And good news on that front, Madam Speaker, I am happy to report today that over 152,000 children have been able to go to the dentist under the age of 12 because of the investments that we make. That's lifting a burden off of Canadian parents, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Madam Speaker, for several months, we've been hearing unacceptable stories about a number of sports in Canada. For years, our government has been implementing new policies in order to end this scourge which is undermining wonderful talents in Canada and also destroying lives. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health and the Minister of Sport explain to us how our government's decisions are creating change? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health and the Minister of Sports. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question and her support in this critical file. Our government is creating new structures to protect athletes and to offer them solutions which will help and support them. A few months ago, the Office of the Sports Ethics Commissioner was created, and already 34 sports federations and associations have joined. We will do everything we can to protect our athletes. Thank you.
For Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are paying the price for his destructive policies. The farmers who produce our food are continuing to struggle. A farmer from my riding recently showed me his latest gas bill for grain drying. The carbon tax and the GST that was applied on top of it amounted to over $1,100. But with the higher cost for producers in the field and consumers at the grocery store, the Liberals don't care. They're going to go ahead and triple that carbon tax anyway. When will they stop punishing Canadian families and the farmers who feed them?
Hear, hear.
L'honorable ministre de l'Agriculture et de l'Agroalimentaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you that we do care for farmers. I work very closely with farmers across the country, and we are the government that has invested the most in the history for the agriculture and agri-food sector. We just signed the the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. We have increased by 25% the cost-shared contribution to support our farmers. When the Conservatives were there, they were cutting in science, they were cutting in business risk management, they were cutting on everything for farmers.
The honourable member for Regina, Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, on December 3rd, CTV ran a story with the following headline: Transport Minister confident in a smooth holiday air travel season. But as we all know, the chaos that Canadians experienced at airports last summer was repeated in December and January, with Canadians stranded at airports for days on end. Madam Speaker, after 8 years, what exactly is this Liberal government doing to prevent air travel chaos?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Madam Speaker, our government understands how the delays and cancellations this holiday season were extremely frustrating for travelers. We expect all airlines to communicate with passengers and keep them informed of delays or cancellations. We are always looking at ways to strengthen rights for passengers, and we will continue to ensure these rights are protected, and the Canadian Transportation Agency has the resources it needs to enforce these rights. And as the minister who was before us at the Transport Committee committed, we are looking to strengthen the passenger air rights. We will continue to make sure that the Canadians have a smooth...
Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, in a vast country such as ours, efficient air travel to all regions is essential. But after 8 years of this Liberal government, mid-size airports like Regina are bearing the brunt of airline cutbacks and lack of competition, leaving people in those regions feeling like second-class citizens. Will this government help Canadians who use mid-size airports, or will this government continue to leave them stranded?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, our government will continue to strengthen everything that the Canadians require to have a smooth experience in travel. We continue to dialogue with our airports. The minister's office and the minister himself continues to meet with them and have that conversation, and we will always be there to listen to the concerns and to the needs, and we will deliver for all Canadians across the country.
Member for Whitby.
Madam Speaker, now more than ever, Canadians rely on access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. It keeps us connected with loved ones, but also allows us to learn online while improving access to essential services and creating opportunities for our businesses to grow. Can the Minister of Rural Economic Development update this House on the progress our government is making on achieving our goal of connecting 98% of Canadians by 2026 and 100% of Canadians by 2030?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my honourable colleague from Whitby for the question and his strong, unwavering advocacy for rural issues. Madam Speaker, we know that investments towards high-speed internet are transformational for improving the lives of rural Canadians, whether they're working from home, accessing health care, education, and frankly, for keeping in touch. Today, 93.5% of Canadians have access to high-speed affordable internet. In 2014, it was just 79% of Canadians Canadians had access, Madam Speaker. As my colleague said, we're well underway to meeting our commitments of having everybody connected by 2030, because, Madam Speaker, when rural Canada succeeds, all of Canada succeeds.
Member for Courtney Alberni.
Speaker, deep seabed mining threatens ocean ecosystems. Rather than take a stand on deep seabed mining like France, Germany, Spain, and others, the Liberals prefer to support Canadian mining companies such as the Metals Company in creating industrial-scale mining sites on the deep seabed. Meanwhile, lives and livelihoods of Indigenous and coastal communities around the world that rely upon the health of the oceans may be threatened. Will this government stand up today for the safety and protection of our oceans and demand a moratorium on international deep seabed mining?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada's position is that seabed and marine environment require effective protection through rigorous regulatory structures, applying a precautionary and ecosystem-based approach, using science-based and transparent management, and ensuring effective compliance. As the situation evolves, Madam Speaker, our government will continue to work with scientists and will work with international partners. We all want to do what's right for Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, the pandemic has been devastating for artists and the organizations that support them. Ticket sales for live orchestras like the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony are still an unsustainable 33% lower than before the pandemic. The government ended pandemic relief funds for arts organizations, but they still need our help. After months of advocacy, the minister said he will monitor the situation, and that's not good enough. Can the KW Symphony count on this government's support in Budget 2023?
Good question. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. We know that the performing arts was the first impacted by the pandemic and will be the last to recover. We are aware of the situation the honourable member has brought to the attention, and I know he's met with the Minister of Canadian Heritage on the file. We will work with this organisation to find the solution to the issues that they've raised. But, Madam Speaker, this government has been there for our culture sector since 2015, after cuts from the previous Conservative government. We've been there from the start of the pandemic. We are there for our arts and culture sector. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And that brings us to the end of question period. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant.
Introduction of private members' bills.
Première lecture de.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Motions. Presenting petitions. The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill, and before the honourable member starts, I want to remind members that maybe they should be filing out quietly if they're heading out for lunch or anything, but I just want to remind them that the House is in session. The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I am pleased to rise and present petition E4122, which has received a whopping over 20,000 signatures from Canadians. That is a significant amount of signatures. The petition refers to the government's dog rescue importation ban, and it asks the government to work with affected dog rescues and animal rights advocates to ensure that government policy on dog importations keep Canadians safe without increasing the number of animals in shelters or streets globally, and to have some compassion and allow dogs into this country that could be reunited with very generous Canadians. And I present this petition on behalf of those 20,000 plus people.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise to present petition from concerned Canadians who are noting the Russian Federation's illegal invasion of Ukraine has heightened concerns around the world about the threat of nuclear war for the first time in a very long time. The petitioners point out that we have had many efforts over the years in nuclear nonproliferation, and that particularly recently we have a historic treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which entered into force in January of 2021. Petitioners also note that the Government of Canada is not participating in the treaty and has even failed to show up as an observer to either the negotiations or the first meeting of the parties. The undersigned citizens and residents of Canada call on the Government of Canada to show a leadership role, and looked at our historic role in that regard, call on Canada to join our allies such as Germany and Norway in at least participating as observers to the ongoing work of the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions. Oh, the honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm tabling a petition today on behalf of residents in my community of Kelowna Lake Country. And due to the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, they are asking for a number of actions. First, they're calling on the government to extend open work permit time limits set through Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel measures. Number two, to extend working visa and student visa time limits through Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel measures. And lastly, to offer a simplified path to permanent residency for Ukrainians who wish to stay in Canada.
Présentation de pétition. Did the honourable member ended, or did she have a second petition?
I had a second.
I'm sorry. So the honourable member, yeah. I don't know if I heard you say that you had a number of petitions. I'm sorry if I didn't.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a petition today that I'm tabling on behalf of residents from Kelowna Lake Country and from the surrounding area in relation to the government bill C-21 on firearms. And it's quite lengthy, but I'll just go right to the ask of the government. First, they're asking for the government to stop targeting law-abiding hunters, sport shooters, and farmers and with gun legislation. Secondly, to immediately withdraw the amendments tabled on November 22nd, 2022 that were at the Standing Committee of Public Safety and National Security. And last, to withdraw the existing Bill C-21 and restart consultations with the firearms community, firearms owners, and public safety experts. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. If revised response to question number 1113, originally tabled on January 30th, 2023, could be made an order for return, this return would be tabled immediately, Madam Speaker. And then furthermore, I would ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Ordre éminent du gouvernement, projet de loi éminent du gouvernement commune, reprise.
Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act.
St. Margaret's had 4 minutes of questions and comments remaining. Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech and contribution to the Industry Committee. Like his colleague for Calgary Nose Hill, who led us to reflect on the Investment Canada Act 2 years ago, my colleague for Windsor West remembers it well. One recommendation that had been put forward, which was ignored by the government, intended to bring more transparency from the minister when making a decision as part of the Investment Canada Act. I would like to hear if this transparency is necessary. When it comes to conditions we impose on businesses, especially for investments, I remember that Lowe's is no longer present. We saw investments. We did not protect our business headquarters. What are we going to do to protect them without more transparency from the minister in action? Is the member for more transparency? The Honourable Member for South Charles St. Margaret's.
Colleague for that important question and for his work over the years on the Industry Committee and that particular report. And it is a very good report. I would encourage all members to read it. I support all of the recommendations in that report. I think we can work together in the Industry Committee when this bill comes to committee to work on that. The transparency about the reasons why an acquisition is reviewed and the reasons for accepting or rejecting it by the Cabinet and the Governor and Council and the Minister are things that should be published with the decision each time so that Canadians can fully understand the rationale behind sometimes what look like very odd things when we lose very important headquartered Canadian businesses to other jurisdictions, and particularly when it is in the case of some acquisitions from countries not as aligned to our goals as we would like.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Windsor-West.
The Honourable Member for Windsor-West. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to follow up with my colleague from Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Did a really good job at committee on the report, and I want to congratulate the member here. He's come on to Industry Committee just recently and done a great job. And I'm really pleased that he's actually researched the report, and I wish the government would have done that as well, too. Really appreciate the fact that we actually are going to bring some of these recommendations forward. The Lowe's one, with regards to the takeover of Rona, and now Lowe's having some questionable ownership in the United States, brings an important one, and just want to have further reflection on that, because when you think about national security, it's also about competition. And it's also about product availability. And with the closure of stores, especially with regards to pricing and other things from wood, lumber, other things that you require, we need to look at a different lens about what this means for Canada, because now we've lost an iconic entity.
L'honorable député de South Shore.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's, 1 minute remaining.
As one of the things I mentioned in my speech, and hopefully we can explore in committee, is this issue of whether or not the net benefit test is being used well enough. And in the case of corporate concentration, we have a lot of corporate concentration in this country. We have oligopolistic industries in many of our industries, and it's one of the reasons why we rank last in productivity by the OECD as a country, and that the OECD actually projects going forward that we are going to be the least productive of the 20 OECD countries in the world. And so that's why this act is so important, and that we get to study not just the security issues, but the issues of net benefit and corporate concentration that we have in this country.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour to be called upon to speak by you, and I would like to greet all of the people in your riding as well. I just want to take a quick moment to highlight the work done at Parliament. Senator Thérault has done incredible work on my team. I want to highlight the contribution for all of the parliamentary interns make. Mr. Speaker, today we have before us legislation introduced by the Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act. This is the first major amendment to the Act since 2009, when the government introduced a national security review process for foreign investment. There's nothing really proposed after that other than a few concordance amendments when trade agreements were concluded. Basically, C-34 increases the government's ability to better control foreign investment, but only those that may be detrimental to national security. It makes no changes to the economic benefit section of the Act. The issue of actually modernizing the Investment Act has once again been avoided. Major issues will not be addressed. C-34 essentially makes 7 changes to make the review process more efficient. We are pleased that the work of the Industry Committee has been taken into account and informed the following changes: a new pre-filing requirement for investments in designated sectors, ministerial authority to extend the national security review of investments, tougher penalties for contraventions, ministerial authority to impose conditions during the national security review period, and so on. The Bloc Québécois will support Bill C-34, which we believe improves the control of investments that could affect national security. However, C-34, in its current iteration, simply does not provide enough protection for our businesses in Quebec. The government just missed a golden opportunity to strengthen our network of businesses and avoid capital flight abroad. To achieve our energy transition, we need all the economic tools at our disposal.
It is possible to add elements to better protect head offices and give a clear signal that a multilateral agreement is possible to meet the need expressed by Quebec to control the development of its economy and protect businesses in the strategic niches it has identified. The ICA, adopted in 1985, requires the government to ensure that significant foreign investments are of net benefit to Canada before they are approved. Since 2009, the Act also contains a national security section that gives the government the power to block a foreign investment if the government believes that the investment could be detrimental to national security. This refers to investments in particularly sensitive sectors, especially if they are made by foreign governments or companies linked to them. Bill C-34, tabled on the 7th of December 2022 by the Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry, improves controls and increases the Minister's powers, but only for investments related to national security. My speech will allow you to identify the few elements that could be seriously considered by the committee as we move through the stage of the legislative process. A few of our colleagues will be here today to give you a reading of what is included in the Draft Investment Act, what tools will allow us to pursue development with confidence whilst maintaining a certain amount of control over foreign investments, what importance is given to the protection of intellectual property, what commitments and conditions are we prepared to demand of investors in order to enhance the creation of wealth here in Quebec. We are planning for our future in the image of the Quebec model, and we would like the federal government to simply recognise this. For years now, the federal government's policy on foreign investment can be summed up in a few words: deregulation and laissez-faire. There has been a tightening of reviews of deal proposals where national security is at stake. But for the rest, the floodgates are open. Any foreign investment, in reality, is almost automatically allowed, and this without review. Statutory review mechanisms, which the government insists on protecting in every trade agreement it signs, are essentially rendered inoperative. I would like to touch upon the work of the Industry and Technology Committee. In the Bloc Québécois supplementary report tabled at the same time as the report of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, we outlined the key elements needed to strengthen Quebec's economic development model. Over the past 10 years, here are the directions of the Conservative and Liberal governments in terms of the threshold at which agreements are subject to review under the Investment Act. In 2013, the Conservative government set the tone by announcing its intention to raise the threshold at which the government assesses whether foreign investments are truly beneficial. From 2015 onwards, it was the Liberal government that stepped up the pace. Did the policies have a real impact? Yes, it was a decade of drift. At every opportunity we had to study the issue at committee, we heard testimony that sounded the alarm about the shortcomings of the laws we have right now. The threshold is not low enough, and too many agreements are simply not examined. And the result is striking. Between 2009 and 2019, the proportion of foreign investments that are reviewed has fallen from 10% to only 1%. You heard me right. Under the current rules, 99% of foreign investments are now automatically accepted without review. That is the reason for which the Bloc Québécois insisted that the minister lower the threshold. The Quebec model includes much smaller companies in terms of size and in greater numbers, which is why the department must lower the threshold to stop the transfer of our intellectual property and talent to companies headquartered outside of Quebec. This drift comes at a bad time. Over the past 30 years, the nature of foreign investment has changed in OECD countries. That is, the share of new investment has tended to decrease, while the share of investment in the form of mergers and acquisitions of existing companies has tended to, on the opposite, increase. We understand that we need to keep up with our trading partners. If there is one thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, it is that global supply chains are fragile and that it is unwise to be completely dependent on decisions made abroad. The new review process is essentially a copy of what is done in the US. Its adoption increases the chances that the Americans will always consider us as a reliable partner, a condition for being a preferred supplier well integrated in their supply chains. In a context where protectionist reflexes are on the rise among our neighbours to the south and could seriously disrupt our economy, this is an important asset, and the Bloc Québécois welcomes it. The Standing Committee on International Trade is currently examining the possible effects of American policies in favour of the electrification of transportation, which could exclude our companies in this field, particularly electric vehicle batteries. C-34, coupled with the new Critical Minerals Directive, which is likely to reduce China's footprint in this sector, is likely to reassure them, which is a good thing. Critical minerals and transport electrification are also important issues. Like other countries, there are good reasons to protect our companies and encourage them to locate near the resources they need. You can't simply blame other countries for taking advantage of opportunities to get their hands on our businesses as long as a thorough and rigorous review has been done. The Abitibi-Témiscamingue region is no exception, and we are aware that our region will be coveted for its sources of rare earth minerals, lithium, copper, nickel, gold. Critical minerals are found all over northern Quebec. We also have one of the best performing universities, UQAT, within the University of Quebec and Abitibi-Témiscamingue, with international experts and the best performing programs. We have the ambition to want to play a leading role and to take advantage of this reality. I see that there could be a group of excellence for rare minerals, and now is the time to create the necessary jobs and achieve a long-term economic and industrial transformation towards a carbon-neutral future. Now is the time to create a future wherein Quebec is a world leader in clean technology, focusing on essential minerals and the development of an innovative and sustainable industrial ecosystem for battery production. Green Mines. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-34 complements the government's new Critical Minerals Directive adopted on the 20th of October 2022, which covers 31 minerals considered critical to the sustainable economic prosperity of Canada and its allies. By supporting the government's new directive on 31 critical minerals, more structuring projects for regions rich in these resources will come to fruition, a real moment to prepare our own future in the creation of technological goods and the electrification of transportation. Here, for example, are the minerals needed for the production of technological goods and the electrification of transport. It is timely to position Canada at the forefront of exploration, extraction, processing and manufacturing, and to make Canada a world leader in the production of batteries and other digital and clean technologies, and to develop an innovative and sustainable battery industry ecosystem in Canada, including making Canada a world leader in battery manufacturing, recycling, and reuse. In these domains, an investment from a foreign government or related company will be considered disadvantageous from the outset, will be subject to national security review, and will likely be denied except in exceptional circumstances. The burden of proof is reversed here. The investment is refused outright unless the investor can demonstrate that it is truly beneficial. The government has recently blocked 3 mining investment projects under this very directive. In doing so, C-34 and the new Critical Minerals Directive should put a stop to the resource grab by Chinese companies and move our industries away from dependence on resources from abroad. Now let us touch upon security. Whilst we are currently discussing the dangers that Chinese companies pose to our security and our telecommunications technology choices, it is equally important to assess the danger to our industries from foreign investment resource grabbing. By ensuring that we thoroughly and accurately assess the economic and security components of each investment, we can take advantage of those that would bring us prosperity and avoid those that would put us at risk. It also allows us to keep up to date with our allies, especially the United States. It ensures that we are seen as a reliable and preferable partner in the trade and the development of essential mineral supply chains, and that we can continue to be part of the green future. The amendments to the Act make the national security review process more efficient by granting the Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry in consultation with the Minister of Public Safety, the authority to issue an order extending the National Security Review under Section 25(3). Previously, an order in Council was required at this stage of the process. By eliminating the need for an order in Council, security and intelligence partners will have more time to complete their increasingly complex intelligence analyses. Now, onto the protection of our intellectual property. Another very important issue, Mr. Speaker. The amendments to the Act introduce a pre-filing requirement for certain investments in designated sectors. This will allow the government to have a view of investments made in industries where the investor could obtain sensitive assets or information, such as intellectual property or trade secrets, immediately after an investment is made. The government will therefore be able to prevent such irreparable harm. Investors in these designated sectors will therefore be required to file a notice within the time limits set out in the regulations. Improved information exchange with international counterparts is the next subject. It is provided for in the bill. The amendments to the ICA facilitate international cooperation and information sharing by allowing the Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry to disclose information about an investor to allied countries to support their intelligence analysis and national security reviews, subject, of course, to conditions that the Minister considers appropriate. Previously, information about a particular investor was considered privileged and could not be disclosed. This amendment will allow Canada to better defend itself in a situation where an investor may be active in several countries seeking the same technology, or where there is a common national security interest. That said, Canada would not share this information for confidentiality or other reasons. The government's blind spot now: preserving our economic leverage. All of these developments are positive, but they are very partial, and the Bloc is asking the government to go further, much further. Last year, according to the data in the annual report on the department's investment branch tabled before Parliament last October, foreigners submitted 1,255 investment projects totaling $87 billion. Of these investment projects, only 24, so 2%, were considered to have an impact on national security and would have been covered by the new rules contained in Bill C-24. The remaining 98% of investments remain subject to the old lax rules and were almost all automatically approved without review. Only 8 projects, so less than 1% of them, were reviewed to determine whether they actually provided a net economic benefit. Because over the years the Act has been weakened, the threshold below which the government does not even review the investment continues to rise, with almost all investments passing through like clockwork without the ICA giving the government the authority to assess whether it is beneficial. The current statute adopted in the mid-1980s assumes that absolute liberalisation of investment is good, that just about any foreign investment is good, regardless the loss of decision-making levers and headquarters that it entrails, the resulting weakening of Montreal's financial position, the total dependence of our companies on foreign suppliers, the possible land grab, the loss of control over our natural resources. By focusing solely on national security, C-34 does not address the gradual loss of control that Quebecers and Canadians have over their economy. We therefore call upon the government to table another bill to modernise the entire ICA, not just the national security section. National security is good, but so is economic security. In particular, the government needs to significantly lower the threshold below which it allows foreign investment without review. Mr. Speaker, we must be open to foreign investment because it is a vector of growth and development that we cannot afford to ignore. Global competition is fierce, but we have a significant competitive advantage. We are reliable, and our carbon footprint is by far the most efficient with our hydroelectricity. On the other hand, we all aspire to support local businesses to help them grow and bring wealth into our homes. We seek to preserve our business and the important decision-making levers that are our head offices. I reiterate that Quebec is and will remain an economy open to the world. Openness to foreign investment is essential to Quebec's integration into the major trade circuits of this world, which is indispensable to the prosperity of an economy of relatively small size. However, we need to be cautious in opening our doors to invest, and so far, the ICA is not helping. We have been burdened with an investment law that has been weakened on several fronts since the 1980s. The fad of absolute liberalization that plagued the 1980s had a negative impact on the quality of our local economies and led to the weakening of financial centers like Montreal to remove the removal of power and decision-making tools from local headquarters, the land grab, the loss of determination over our own resources. Like Jacques Parizeau already wrote in 2001, even before China joined the World Trade Organization, you don't condemn the tides. You build dikes, jetties, and you protect yourself, in short. Since the Quiet Revolution, the Quebec government has acquired important economic and financial levers. These tools allow it to pursue, with varying degrees of energy depending on the government, a policy of economic nationalization aimed at giving Quebecers better control over their economy. Unfortunately, with the weakening of the Investment Canada Act during all this time, this dam has fallen. We need to convince all members of the need to enshrine sections in the Act to close the gap. It's a welcome but incomplete shift. The arrival of significant investment from companies linked to the Chinese government has changed the game. Canada is beginning now to realize the need to better control foreign investment and to ensure that it is beneficial before it is allowed. This bill reflects the belated realization, and the Bloc Québécois is pleased. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when I take a look at Bill C-34, I see legislation that is in Canada's best interest. And I think of our economy as, generally speaking, and the dependency that Canada has on international trade. A lot of investment coming into the country, and there is investment that goes out. And this legislation is there to protect the interests of our nation from a safety perspective, but it also is there to ensure that we continue to build our economic links throughout the world and have the type of investments that are there to advance our communities, no matter where they are in Canada. And I wonder if the member can just provide his thoughts in regards to, is it the intentions for the Bloc Party to support Bill C-34?
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Winnipeg North for his question. I'd like to reiterate that, yes, the Bloc Québécois will support this bill, but will also propose a number of improvements, especially to preserve our head offices. The threshold question is simple. What happens in the case of a devaluation? If we are in a recession, Mr. Speaker, well, this is going to be concerning. COVID was very concerning for our businesses like Air Transat, the value of which was greatly diminished by the abandonment of air travel. This had an impact, and if its value goes underneath the infamous threshold I mentioned, it would mean that it could be bought again by a foreign company, be it American, European, Chinese. These are head offices and business decisions that will no longer be made in Canada and in Quebec. We have a significant problem in Abitibi-Témiscamingue with regards to the flights that we have from Rouen-Noranda. Air Transat wanted to figure out if they could have flights from Rouen-Noranda internationally. Unfortunately, it never happened, but we know that this is a company that may be good for regional aviation. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question from my colleague for Abitibi-Témiscamingue, who is the best salesman of the Abitibi region at the Industry Committee, and I share a lot with him.
Nous avons vécu l'an dernier parce que
Last year, I'm also on the Industry Committee, and last year we saw that a company, Neolithium, was sold to Chinese interests. It was sold abroad And we also know that companies were sold to interests abroad, I think in Colombia, although I can't remember. So my question, would this bill enable us to avoid this type of thing? Having our companies sold abroad, including some of our rare minerals which we have in Abitibi. Would this bill reduce the potential impact of these decisions? The Honourable Member. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my Quebec colleague, which is important to mention because his presence on the Industry Committee means that we talk even more about Quebec and these questions of economic development. It's always interesting to hear from him. And he's an entrepreneur. I would just remind him that the region is called Abitibi-Témiscamingue. It's very important to include Témiscamingue. Otherwise, people might be upset. Now, yes, we did have concerns about the sale of neolithium because the mechanism was not triggered automatically. But also, we have to remember that neolithium only had its headquarters in Canada, but it was ultimately an empty shell. So that's another nuance here. But we really need to consider the importance of owning our own resources. At a time when things like strategic minerals are increasingly an important matter, and we know that some of these minerals are very rare, we really need to protect our resources. We need to promote our industry. But if we send all of our lithium abroad, for example, to Tesla, because we think it's great to supply Tesla with Quebec lithium, well, then we're not actually engaging in our own economic development, which concerns me. I think we really need to pivot here in our national economy. We need to protect our businesses, first of all. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
You're doing a fantastic job. I've had this a couple times in the chair, and it didn't turn out so good that you're doing right now, actually. And to my colleague who sits on Industry Committee, we did actually study this, and as he's noted in his speech in the previous Parliament, and then we had really an unnecessary election, I think, that we all can relate to in different ways. But the government never really responded to the report that we did, which was very thorough. And the member was very articulate, and also he was very determined to raise the threshold issues consistently through the report and through the actually testimony. And I'd like to ask to whether or not he feels that the government gets a pass, and the minister, from this report. I don't believe so, because they were the ones that called the unnecessary election that we had. We didn't get the work through the full vetting process that it should have gone because of that, and I still think it's very relevant to what we're dealing with today, and I'd like the member to reflect on that, please.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Well, I'm sure that I've told him this before, but the member who just asked the question is a mentor for me on these matters. He's been on the committee for a long time, and indeed, it's quite shocking that at a committee where we're normally very collaborative and productive, it's been shocking to see all these studies end up dying on the order paper. But thanks to the collaboration of my colleague, I have tabled a number of motions to bring these studies back to the table and ensure that the government gives answers, which is critical. And in regard to his question about thresholds, that's very important. And there's something else, something that's been completely ignored by the Liberals, and that was ignored by them in their answer to our report. There's the matter of making sure that the minister is more transparent when he makes a decision about the Investment Canada Act. For example, the matter of Rona and Lowe's. It's very important to have it be transparent. We need to know what criteria were imposed on Lowe's. We need to know about jobs, investment, keeping storefronts open in certain regions. What were the requirements? We don't know. And we know that the company might not respect them in that case. Questions and comments?
L'honorable député de Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. He talked about critical minerals, and we know that there was a categorical no to China on the matter of critical minerals, but we know that other countries, like the U.S., also have their eye on this sector. should we ensure that there's a way to maintain control over our critical mineral resources, even if an allied country makes a request, to ensure that our supply chain be always in our own hands? The honourable member. I'd like to thank my colleague for her very, very important analysis. And once again, I'd like to say that what's been done at the Industry Committee has been very good, because we studied critical minerals right after neolithium. Before the last election, I criticized Canada for not having a national strategy on strategic minerals. And I think that's something we did at the committee, was we focused on the fact that we need to ensure that the regions that have resources are taking part in the processing, and that's very good for the environment and for our industries. For example, our auto industry. After all, we know that auto parts cross the border many times, but if things are done right from the mine, then we'll be protecting our national economy. Thank you. We have time for one more brief question. The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend from LeBlanc for a very thoughtful intervention on this subject. With respect to Chinese state-owned enterprises, could the member reflect on the threshold that he believes might be reasonable? I believe the last committee in the previous parliament indicated that a much lower threshold, maybe even zero, should be considered. Thank you.
Donc, l'honorable député d'Abitibi.
The honourable member, 30 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to say that my colleague is a rising star in the Conservative Party, and I'm always interested in seeing his progress. Now, we know that China control 80% of the lithium market. So if we want to ensure that we strengthen our economy, globalization is essentially over. We need to protect our domestic economy. We need to ensure that our businesses have the supply they need, the chips they need to produce electric vehicles. So we need to consider ourselves and Quebec first and foremost. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Windsor-West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I want to actually deviate from my original plan here to kind of continue a little bit the member for Timiskaming. Brings up a really interesting aspect to the debate on the Rona experience that we had that is important in a couple contexts that I want to expand on because it was a Canadian, Quebec-based, iconic company. It still has remnants and still has parts of it today, but was a really good sensation for not only Quebec, but also other parts of Ontario and other parts of Canada. And so the member was very astute in reflecting on the lack of information and support we got to guarantee decision-making as it was taken over by Lowe's. And, when we think about national security, sometimes we think about weapons and we think about intelligence and we think about all those matters, but sometimes we forget our national security also includes competition in the market and then access to goods and services that we undermine by allowing foreign takeovers like that. And now a private equity firm from the United States is basically in ownership of Lowe's, which gives some more of a skewed and distorted representation than what we had was actually a Canadian iconic company that was taken over. And the decision-making process, as the member has noted, was never clear to all of Canada. And on top of that, when you look at what's been required, we went through the pandemic and people actually stayed at home, did renovations, and we have softwood lumber shortages. We've had lack of competition on a number of different fields. We know that from the cell phone industry, for example, but we also know it through the oil and gas industry with lack of refining capacity. And the takeover of Rona is one that we actually need to look and reflect at in a different way than just a transaction. Now, we normally traditionally feel these things through, the workers and those that are directly impacted at that moment. But we also have to be more complex in Canada because we're dealing with a number of oligopolies that control certain aspects of our market. You look at our grocery store chains, for example, where there is a lack of competition, where they did even collusion on bread pricing and fixing. And we know at Industry Committee, we also heard testimony when the heroic pay was ended, they all talked to each other that week and then decided within the same day to stop that payment to workers. And the reason I raise these things is that there's a deeper level of vulnerability that we have in our economy because Canada is susceptible more than the United States and Europe to lack of competition. And we have a competition law that's vastly outdated. So with New Democrats, we'll be bringing amendments to this bill at committee that actually address some of these issues, and hoping that we'll see support from that from other parties. The committee, I will note, is well led by a bipartisan effort, and we've actually done some really good work. And that's why I referenced earlier the work that we did in the previous Parliament. I'll return to that a little bit later. That we got done, but was basically usurped from the actual process because of the election. And then on top of that, I don't think that the current minister, who actually does put forth a fair amount of legislation that's happened and is very busy, and I give him credit for all those things, but has yet to address that in a comprehensive way. And I'm hoping that when he comes to committee to bring the bill forward, we'll be prepared to deal with some of those questions. And I think he will be. We didn't hear it today, but that's okay. But the committee process, I think, will be very robust, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to get into a few of those recommendations a little bit later, but want to emphasize that just because they were last Parliament doesn't mean that they're irrelevant. In fact, we've actually had a number of reports that we've had to bring back that were dealt with. So one of the things that I want to deal with on C-34, so the official act is an act to amend the Investment Canada Act, National Security Review of Investments Modernizations Act, actually goes back to the 1980s. And it really actually dealt with the fact that many Canadian companies were being bought by U.S. Firms and investment, and we had some of the hollowing out of Canada. And, you know, there's been notation about the reviews, and right now, under the current process, about 99% are not even looked at or touched. So that hasn't worked at all. In fact, when you look at the Act and its modernization approach to it, it's actually had a couple of amendments. When I first came to the House here in 2002 and in 2003, subsequently, we did a review of China Mid-Metals and raised at that time the fact that non-democratic governments, that one being China, and state-owned companies were purchasing up Canadian natural resources. So what was ironic about this time period was that as Canada, under the Paul Martin regime and the Liberals, was divesting from Petro-Canada, for those that remember Petro-Canada, we actually had a strategy, and we actually had a investment in that was quite significant, but we divested it. Shockingly, I can get into more detail of that than probably is necessary here, but when Mr. Martin sold it, within 6 months we lost another I think it was $4 billion. We could have actually attained more for the assets because it actually went up in the market after that. That's a side story, and it also led to some of the current problems we have now with lack of competition for refining because Petro-Canada was allowed to close refineries, the most significant one being in the Burlington-Oakville area. And so we have lack of competition because refineries now actually produce for everybody. And that's one of the challenges that we have in the oil and gas sector. But I wanted to note that because China Mid-Metals and then other companies under the state-sponsored flag were buying up Canadian companies. And ironically, we were divesting as a country from assets that we actually had, which was unfortunate, I think, to this day. But at any point, that brought in a push for ourselves to ask for the security screen for that. And it's not just China. I want to be clear on this. I mean, we're talking about non-democratic governments in general. That's what I've been referring to. That should obviously have additional screen on them. And also, I think, which has been missed, and I'm looking forward to an amendment on this and how to address it, is private equity firms. Where we have Canadian iconic companies that have been bought up by private equity firms where we don't even know the real owner or owners of some of those companies. And again, this could affect competition and a series of things. So I'm hoping that this act can look at an amendment to deal with some of those things as well, too. There's been a lot of challenges that we have with the ownership rules. And again, 99% are not even looked at under the threshold right now. The other thing, too, about this act, and I do give the minister credit on this, he's brought it to Parliament. There's been previous amendments to this bill, 2009 and other times, where it came as part of a Budget Implementation Act. So to be fair to the government and to be fair to the minister is that when you put something through a budget, it doesn't get the same scrutiny that individual legislation gets. And so for those policy wonks out there with regards to this, I know a Friday afternoon on how this place works is probably really riveting, but it goes through a budget. Then the budget doesn't actually have all the committee work that is going to happen through legislation. So I think that's important to note, and to give the government credit for that, and to give the minister credit for that, because what's going to happen now is this will be referred to Industry Committee, which has a history of doing some really good work, and it will get its full vetting process through this place and also through the Senate as well too. So whatever comes out of the process that we're going to go on here, we'll get a full review that's necessary, and that's why it'll be interesting, though. The challenge will be is what's going to be admissible for amendments, what will be out of scope, what will be in scope, but those procedural things will start to work themselves through. But again, this is actually the proper process to bring this through. And some of the weaknesses that we're dealing with today, we warned about during the budget bill. So as we talked and debated budget bills, and those elements, they get washed over really quickly. That won't happen in this bill. It'll have its proper due course and time in the House and the Chamber. And again, as I noted, it'll actually go through the other place, being the Senate. And if they make any changes, they have to be approved by this House at the end of the day. So for the procedural elements, I think that we start on a very much a better footing than ever before. And that's why I'm really still strongly advocate for the previous report that the committee did. It was over 70 pages with regards to the Investment Canada Act. We heard a lot of witnesses. My friend from the block has mentioned, did some excellent work on with regards to critical minerals, especially when you look at the province of Quebec has some very strategic assets for the province, and also with reflection to the rest of the country as well too, that we're going to be part of a strategy for auto and as well other types of battery modernization that's critical. And so there's a lot of issues to be dealt with and unpacked there. And I think one of the things that we look at in this bill is the threshold again, because so there's kind of two areas that the Act really kind of focuses on. The net benefit being, if the takeover takes place, will there be an improvement in the Canadian economy, the workplace, and it's very subjective about that. And I think that's been whitewashed many times before. And I'll give another good example. I'm showing my age here again. The Future Shop versus Best Buy, where, essentially we had two consumer electronics marketing platforms in this country. And basically Best Buy bought up the Future Shop, another Canadian iconic company, and we have less competition, we have less innovation, and we have less access to the public for some of those services that are necessary. I know that we like to buy a lot of things online right now, but especially when it comes to electronics, the maintenance and the repair of them, we still require certain things. And so the Future Shop is gone now. So that affects, basically competition. And I think that really their only competitor is online stores now, maybe Staples and a few other handful of stores. But again, that was approved and we lost that. Another one I want to refer to, and I think that when we think about strategy, which is frustrating for myself, was Zellers. If those, again, people remember what Zellers was again another Canadian iconic retail merchant store. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, this is, and I don't understand, I posed it then, and I think the government needs to reflect on itself in terms of the approval of this. They had higher wages, they actually had union workers, they had benefits, and at a time when the industry was losing money, they had a profit margin. And then they were taken over by the American Target, which was allowed to come in. They took over some stores, closed a bunch of others. Then Target exited the country. And it was basically to eliminate competition. So we eliminated jobs, we eliminated competition, and then when the Target came into, I don't know what it was like in other stores, but in Windsor, it was ridiculous. So I'm a goalie in hockey. Well, I'm retired now, but at any rate, especially with my current knee. But at any rate, yeah, for a lot of other reasons. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. An honourable member is reminding me also of my goals against average. At any rate, they had like aisles and aisles of just one hockey stick. So it was a false takeover. And so these are serious things because we lost those employment positions, but again, we lost competition in a market where we've seen diminishing retail assets. And it's not even just about the store, it also was an anchor for other malls and other shopping centers. So there's a long ways of looking at this, is what I'm getting at with that. So when we have this review through Parliament, it'll be interesting to see what we're going to actually get with regards to the capability to expand the current case of the bill. And I'm not sure what's going to be ruled in and out of order for some of the amendments that I have, but it will be interesting, and I'm sure my colleagues will have some of the things. So one of the things that's kind of important about the bill, I want to talk about a couple of things that I think are important. There is a notification process that actually will come in place right now. So the minister is going to actually get more of a heads up with regards to the takeover. So I think if it's me, and I think it's fairly safe to say some of the colleagues that I have from the Conservatives and the Bloc and perhaps the Liberals will probably want more reviews or access to reviews. That'll provide a benefit, in my opinion, to at least the process. And also it's going to be very important when we're looking at some of the more serious innovations that we have coming forward in some of the companies. And one of the things that sticks in my craw quite a bit is when we actually have Canadian taxpayers give money to corporations and then there's no rules on those, and then they move the innovation outside of the country. So I'll give a quick example is that then Minister Baines, who I really enjoyed working with within this House and Chambers, he came into Windsor and they gave money to an auto manufacturer from Mexico, but located in Windsor, NEMAC. They had bought out a Ford assembly provision. They got money for innovation at that time for transmission. And I asked at that time announcement, what guarantees do you have that they're going to keep the work here? Because that was the only Canadian facility that they had. He said, no problem, it's all taken care of. And I said, well, how? And no, it's done, don't worry, whatever. And so that was the end of it. Well, what ended up happening is they were a terrible employer. And not only that, they did the innovation in the Windsor plant, and then they moved it to Mexico. And then they closed the Windsor plant. And we had to fight, even including the court system, and where I won't give the government credit because they were horrible on this, because we had to take the government to court as well, too, to protect the pensions and get the money that was owed to them. I've seen enough of this. I've seen enough in my community in the auto sector, and I know this personally because I remember my brother, who worked at then Windsor Plastics, was taken over by a foreign company that not only took all their assets, but they took their money from the United Way, they took their employment insurance, they took all the kind of things that they basically could out of this country. And we've seen that a few times take place. And so NEMAC now got the Canadian taxpayers' money. They did the innovation, and now we're actually, getting into auto supports for other companies just to actually compete against the product that's now built in Mexico at our expense. So it makes no sense. And there has to be something in this act, thank you, Mr. Speaker, that is going to deal with some of these things. And maybe that's where we get more transparency, I think, with regards to any type of endeavors that the minister is allowed to do. And so the bill does actually have that where the minister can put more specifics on that. And as noted earlier, some of the smaller companies that we have can actually be some of the most critical things. We spend a lot of money for SR&ED tax credits. These are for research and development and so forth. And I think those all have to become public if a Canadian company is going to be taken over by any foreign company, whether it's a state one or a non-state one, a private equity firm or whatever. I think we have the right to know if Canadian taxpayers' money has been used, whether it's through tax relief, through innovation and support, which some things are excellent, and I really support a lot of those things. But there should be no shyness when you're actually going to the taxpayer to ask for support for your business, that you have to disclose that later on. And it should be a full review, and that's one of the things that publicly can be reviewed. Because in this legislation as well, too, actually creates another process for judicial review that's actually going to be behind closed doors, because some of the information actually can be very challenging for the government and the company to deal with, because it involves security. And when I talk about security, I want to highlight kind of the transition we're seeing right now in some of these small, medium-sized companies that I'd like to see greater reviews on, because they deal with your privacy, intellectual property. We're getting into artificial intelligence, for example, and we're actually subsidizing quite a bit of innovation on that front. And I think that there needs to be full disclosure for those things, that they at least notify that the money went in there. Maybe we don't know all the types of products and services that are being done if they're going to be sensitive information, but at least they can be noted that they receive taxpayers' funding. And I think that would give some more confidence when it comes to this issue. And so I want to actually, only a couple minutes left, but I also want to remind the issue that when we think of these hard, these internet type of services and other things that are taking place right now, we have had some referrals stopped. We had McDonald Detweiler, and I want to thank Peggy Nash, former member of Parliament from from High Park, who did an amazing job in this chamber stopping that from the takeover. The other one that we fought against, and thank goodness we stopped, was potash. Another highly publicly subsidized company, but also a very much natural resource that is very important to Canada. And when we think about the critical minerals that are going to take place in the upcoming years in the auto sector, we need to be very much mindful of that, because microchips was referenced in the previous discussions by, I think, my member from the Conservatives and the Bloc also mentioned the microchips. My colleague here did. We used to actually be the producers in the world in the Mississauga area. Then we let this be outsourced to Taiwan quite a bit. And now the United States is into massive subsidization. We're doing some investments now as well, too. And so we need to make sure that we have a long-term plan for those things. So certain industries, when they get certain amounts of money from the public, we probably should be looking at maybe some rules and regulations on timeframes on themselves. Actually, once you get significant public income from, that should be reviewed and should be mandated to actually have a different threshold. I want to conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying that other countries have been dealing with this issue as well. Japan has brought in some new legislation. Australia, even India, when it comes to especially their land borders with other countries in investment, they've actually brought in some new rules, and the European Union as well. So I do appreciate the fact that this is coming through the chamber this time. Many times during the budget debates, my responsibility for the New Democrats at that time was to challenge the fact the government was doing it through a budget process, and they rubber stamped it. And we're in this situation for a reason, is because we didn't do the right thing. This is a start to do the right thing, Mr. Speaker, and I want to look forward to, when this does get to committee, to a cooperative process, and hopefully we can actually do some comprehensive reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Government in the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable colleague across the way for his speech. We actually worked together in a previous Parliament on the Industry Committee, and we tabled a report actually last Parliament with respect to this issue. And I'd like to offer the member across an opportunity to perhaps share with the House some of what we heard when we studied this in the 43rd Parliament that he would like to see implemented in this bill as well. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Windsor-West.
The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
I'm so pleased that my former chair is here, who did, and communities do an excellent, but did a remarkable job. Our current chair is good too, but I have to say though, with all sincerity, the committee operates so well, and she has a particularly good history of it, including this report that I referenced here that has her name. I can't read her name right here, but it says right there, at any rate. We heard a lot of really good testimony, and that's why it's 74 pages long, and it was very much a robust approach to it. One of the things that we had as a recommendation, a simple one, I think this is appropriate. I'm going to read number 2, that the Government of Canada introduced legislation to amend the Investment Canada Act so that the thresholds are reviewed on an annual basis. Like, there's a simple one like that that could be done as a routine procedure for what we do. And I look forward to there's other more comprehensive recommendations. We actually had, Madam Speaker, in total there was 6 recommendations, or 7 recommendations, with a couple other subsections as well, too, that haven't been done. There was 9 in total. So I look forward to working on those. And thank again the former chair for her work.
Comments? The honourable member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and appreciated the speech by my colleague from Windsor West, who I'm enjoying working with on the Industry Committee, and for the former chair who did marvelous work on it, because it is a great report. And my personal favorite is recommendation 1, if you want to know, which is that the state-owned enterprises be reduced to 0 for review. But my question for the member is, I don't think I recalled hearing him about the Investment Canada Act focuses on the acquisition of companies, but it doesn't focus at all on the acquisition of individual assets, like a mine sold from a company to a foreign interest, or a technology sold without the company being sold, but bought by an interest that may not be in Canada's best security interest or net benefit. So could he comment on that, please?
For Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think my colleague has been terrific so far on the committee, and actually this is a really good thing that we missed in the previous review. And it's actually really appropriate for us to deal with this, especially when you look at, you actually have, again, I've referenced private equity firms, but you could have billionaires, you could have others that are tinkering with different things that could actually, take a look at individual assets or innovation that's new. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think the amendments are appropriate. And it's kind of refreshing because we didn't look at that in the previous report, and that's why I think an annual review for thresholds is important, because this is an ongoing thing, especially with how things move so quickly right now. So I'm looking forward to the members' contribution, and thank them for adding that, because again, that's a new lens that we didn't deal with in the past.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
And to the honourable colleague from Windsor West, thank you for a speech full of good examples of things that have happened in the past. I also reflect on the fact that, by a hair's breadth, we nearly lost HoC Construction to the People's Republic of China, and that was, again, almost never had a security review if we hadn't started mentioning it in this place. So this is progress, but I want to reflect and ask the honourable member for Windsor West if we don't want to also have a lens on, I know this is still in the philosophical framework of C-34 is still in the frame that we're better off when everything is traded all around the world and we have a massive globalized economy. Clearly, we're always going to have a globalized economy, but in the wake of COVID, can we say that it wouldn't be better to have as many supply chains within Canada, rebuild Canada's manufacturing capacity, and actually have the jobs here at home and food grown at home for Canadians? Thank you.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to my colleague. And while I have the floor, I can actually give a plug and say thank you for her hard work in putting together the all-party rail caucus. She deserves credit for that, has been pushing this for more than 6 months. And we had their first meeting, and I want to thank her for that initiative. And also mentioning HoC Construction, which I raised several times in the House, and which is an interesting one because it relates to me back at home, because HoC Construction was actually part and still was part of the Gordie Howe project in the infrastructure along Canada's busiest border and in my riding. And that was actually going to be bought up by Chinese government at that time. And so imagine, I raised it several times. I worked with Congress and Senate members that were on the U.S. side. They didn't want to have a bridge between Canada and the United States having the highest volume of trade being built that's in the billions of dollars be owned by the Chinese federal government. And so that was, or any other government, that was a non-starter. So that's an important one. And the supply chain relates to that as well, too. We saw that during the COVID experience. There was actually some contributions to some medicines that we had in the past and some new vaccines, and we have lost that control, and so now we're actually in an embarrassing situation with one company that's folding that got Canadian money. So the member brings a really good point to that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member from Windsor West has a huge track record in the House of Commons of actually ensuring that we protect Canadian jobs, stimulating the economy. We've seen under the Conservatives and under the Liberals selling out portions of our economy. So I wanted to ask the member from Windsor West, with his long experience and his deep knowledge of industrial policy, what he would do as when he becomes a future Minister of Industry in an NDP government.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleague, long-standing friend, and appreciate his question. And actually, a couple of things come to mind right away is that, yes, we've seen, and it goes back to the previous question, too, is that the so-called free market economy, I don't know where it exists. First of all, a couple points. Trade always existed. We just created boundaries as people. Trade always existed. Like my area has settled 300 years, but prior to that, it was indigenous in terms of its areas, trading area. Trade always happened. We just created the borders ourselves. And so there's no doubt that we're always going to be a trading thing, but countries protect certain industries. And when you look at the United States, which is always held up as the model of capitalism, they have the Jones Act, they have the Buy American Act, the Buy America Act. They have several different pieces of legislation related to procurement for the arms industry, supply manufacturing industry, all those things that are national and strategic. And so for myself, I want actually a national policy on manufacturing to be developed. We actually have done some of those things in the past, but we should be at least match our competition competition in the world and be very careful about how we have investments come in and also vulnerability with regards to where we actually invest public money and then have it actually go across a board.
Pour une autre question, we have time for
one more question. We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Madam Speaker, I just want to follow up with a question from my colleague from South Shore St. Margaret's about individual assets ending up in the hands of foreign state-owned enterprises. And I'm thinking particularly of state-owned enterprises owned by a non-democratic nation, as the member for Windsor had stated, by funding research chairs at Canada's research universities and then ending up at the end of the process owning an asset which was born of Canadian ingenuity. This doesn't go to national security necessarily, but it certainly goes to the strength of our economy.
Windsor West.
Madam Chair, thank the member for his question. And again, that's another good example that we didn't get into, is talking about the work that and the money that we spent publicly for national research chairs, which is an investment in our education system. And also, we also have a poor record of actually moving that type of research and innovation to markets. That's a whole other separate story. We actually have a poor record on that, which actually could be a good record. And I'm looking forward to looking at this more. And national security also is very much an open field with regards to how that's being interpreted. So we'll see what the definition what the minister has when he comes, but I have, I think, a much more open perspective on that, as I've noted in consumer issues in my speech should be looked at as well, too, because I view that through a national security lens as well.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be sharing my time. I'm pleased to speak about Bill C-34, an Act to amend Investment Canada Act. Canada has a long-standing reputation for welcoming foreign investments and a strong framework to promote trade while advancing Canadian interests. In fact, Canada has one of the earliest and most robust screening processes for foreign investments in the world. The Investment Canada Act was enacted 38 years ago in 1985 to encourage investment in Canada that contributes to economic growth and employment opportunities. The Act allowed the government to review significant foreign investments to ensure these benefits exist. The Act was updated in 2009 to include a framework for national security review of foreign direct investments. Bill C-34 implements a set of amendments to improve the national security review process of foreign investments and modernize the ICA. Collectively, these amendments represent the most significant legislative update of the ICA since 2009. These amendments would also ensure that Canada's review process is consistent with our allies. However, in my view, there is another issue in foreign direct investment that should be looked into, that is dealing with economic security. I believe this is not only the opportunity, but also a necessity that we deal with foreign direct investment that result in economic stagnation of any sector of our economy, thus affecting our long-term economic security. Let me explain this by first quoting a couple of sentences from the backgrounder that was published. It stated, "The Act is designed to encourage investment, economic growth, and employment." The backgrounder also stated that the Government of Canada has committed to promoting economic security and combating foreign interference by modernizing the ICA to strengthen the national security review process and better mitigate economic security threats arising from foreign investment. For me, the key words are economic security. There's no mention of the words economic security in the bill tabled by the government which we are debating today. Probably the thought is economic security and national security are considered as synonyms. I will now explain the importance of economic security. Canada is growing, our population is growing, our economy and GDP are growing, and we need our economic sectors to grow and contribute to economic growth and employment. If any economic or industrial sector does not grow, does not contribute to economic growth due to foreign direct investment, then in my view, this is a threat to economic security. Any stagnation or complete lack of economic growth in a growing economy will directly affect our economic security in the medium to long term. I'll give two examples where foreign direct investment in Canada has resulted in stagnation of economic growth, which in turn is a threat to our economic security. The two industrial sectors that are prime examples for this are the steel and aluminium industry in Canada. The whole aluminium and steel sector companies are foreign owned. Due to our encouragement of foreign direct investment, today both the sectors with 100% foreign ownership have been reduced to branch office of multinational companies which are dominating aluminium and steel industry worldwide. Due to this 100% foreign ownership, there is no increase in production capacity in both these sectors in Canada for the last 20 years. During the last 20 years, aluminium production has basically stagnated at 3 million tons. While many new aluminium smelters are being set up in China and other countries, the installed capacity of aluminium sector in Canada has stagnated. Same with the steel industries. During the last 20 years, installed capacity has basically stagnated at about 15 million tons. Not only there is no growth in production capacity of steel and aluminium, due to 100% foreign ownership, Canada's steel and aluminium exports are limited just to the US and Mexico. There's hardly any Canadian steel and aluminium exports to Europe or growing markets in Asia. Canada has signed numerous free trade agreements across the world. We have free trade agreement with Europe, with Asia Pacific countries. Totally, we have free trade agreements with over 50 countries. But has the aluminium and steel sector taken advantage of these free trade agreements to increase Canadian exports? The answer is absolutely no. So my question is, due to our welcoming foreign direct investments that lead to 100% foreign ownership in entire industrial sector, and this results in growth stagnation of that sector, is it not a threat to our long-term economic security? Again, my question is, if 100% foreign ownership prevents Canadian industry not to take advantage of our natural resources and our expertise to export Canadian goods all across the world, is this not a threat to our long-term economic security? We need all sectors in our industry to add value to our natural resources and contribute to Canada's economic growth by increasing their capacity to produce. We need all economic sectors to build on our many decades of knowledge and expertise to contribute to Canada's economic growth by increasing Canadian exports across the world. Madam Speaker, I again state, if any economic or industrial sector does not grow, does not contribute to economic growth due to foreign direct investment, then in my view, this is a threat to economic security. Also, any stagnation or complete lack of economic growth in a growing economy will directly affect our economic security in the medium to long term. I call upon this House to take this opportunity to address this shortcoming in the Investment Act. Other than this, I completely agree with everything else that has been proposed in the bill. There was a need to update and streamline the administrative process in the light of shifting geopolitical environment and need for alignment with international allies and better coordination efforts with allies. The world looks a lot different now than in 2009, when the Act was last amended. The global market has rapidly changed as with shifting geopolitical threats. Canada's interactions with the rest of the world are changing. The government has seen a rise in state-sponsored threat activities from hostile state and non-state actors. They are attracted by Canada's technologically advanced and open economy and world-class research community. The level of sophistication that these threats has also increased. Hostile state and non-state actors are deliberately pursuing strategies to acquire goods, technologies, and intellectual property through foreign investments that will damage Canada's economy and undermine national security while controlling the supply chain of critical goods. In fact, Canada has one of the earliest and most robust screening processes for foreign investments in the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated this threat by creating vulnerabilities that could lead to opportunistic, harmful investment behavior by foreign investors. They are looking to buy up vulnerable Canadian businesses. In response, the government has taken swift, concrete action to enhance scrutiny on inbound investments related to public health and critical goods and services. The government has again taken action recently by enhancing scrutiny of investments involved in sensitive goods and technology such as critical minerals, critical infrastructure, and sensitive personal data. Through these amendments, the government is prepared to once again take action to strengthen the national security review while still allowing for positive foreign investments. Economic-based threats to national security are an increasing concern not just for Canada but of allies as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Questions and comments? The Honourable Deputy House Leader for the Government.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent speech. And I know that this is an issue that's really important to him, and I'd like to know if he would, is there anything else that he thinks that we should be also including in this bill to make sure that this is as strong as it could be? Thank you.
The Honourable from the PM.
Thanks. I thank my colleague for her question. In addition to the economic security issues, I discussed some of the points that were brought by my other colleagues earlier in the debate, like the purchase of individual asset other than the company itself, and some of the issues that was brought by the member from INSER on the lack of competition resulting in the foreign direct investments. These are the kind of things that need to be considered now. As we know that this act has not been looked since last, I think, 13 years. This is the first opportunity we have, and we need to use this opportunity to consider all aspects that are directly related.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the comments by the member from Nepean. I'd like to ask him about state-owned enterprises from not-so-democratic countries, that was the recommendation number 1 of the Industry Committee's report from last Parliament on this issue, that the threshold for consideration as a national security or net benefit test under this Act be reduced from the $415 million to $0, so that every transaction in every type of industry by a state-owned enterprise from a non-democratic country would be reviewed. That's not in this bill. Would the honourable member support that being amended that way?
Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. The investment by state-owned enterprises from non-friendly countries obviously have to be looked very deep into. I am not sure whether we should have a minimum threshold, but as I said, that every single investment by state-owned enterprises has to be looked into. But at the same time, in addition to state-owned enterprises, I also want to highlight that the investment by the global multinational companies, as I mentioned in the steel and aluminum sector, who have made direct investment, and 100% of the sector ownership is foreign-owned, leading to Canadian companies becoming the branch office of these multinational companies and curtailing the potential to grow Canadian exports across the world. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Nepean for his speech. The Bloc Québécois is still shocked by the sale of Rona to the American company Lowe's, with all the negative impacts this will have. According to my colleague, if C-34 is adopted as is, would such transactions be allowed? Will our interests not be better protected? Will they be better protected, rather, under C-34?
Member for Nepean, the last response.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I think everything that affects Canada's competitiveness, Canada's growth, Canada's economic security, Canadian national security have to be looked into. Let me be very clear, Madam Speaker. I am for foreign direct investment. I am for free trade. However, all aspects that affects our national security and economic security has to be looked into. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member wishes. The honourable member has 1 minute, just about a minute left, the next time that this matter is before the House for questions and comments. Comme il est 13h30.
As it is 1:30, we will now move on to private members' business.
Private members' business, consideration at report stage of Bill C-226, National Strategy Respecting Environmental Racism and Environmental Justice Act, standing in the name of Ms. May.
Comme il n'y a aucune motion à l'étape.
There being no motion at report stage, the House will now proceed without debate to the putting of the question on the motion to concur in the bill at report stage.
Ms. May, Sanish Gulf Island, seconded by Mr. Morris, moves that Bill C-226, an act respecting the development of a national strategy to assess, prevent, and address environmental racism and to advance environmental justice be concurred in at report stage. Si un député d'un parti reconnu présent en Chambre désire que la motion soit adoptée,
if a member of a recognised party present in the House wishes that a motion be carried or carried on division, or wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the Chair.
Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to request a recorded division.
Pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23, 2022, the division stands deferred until Wednesday, February 8, 2023, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. It being 1:32, this House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay warm.